Hello friends. Welcome to the Muse fanfiction. How are you all? So in this video, we will see what if Namikaze Naruto fell in the dimensional void. But before we start, if you want more amazing stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Also, if possible, share this video with your friends. Now without wasting any more time, let's begin the story. Hoshigaki Kisame was a man who was used to all things strange. He did after all carry a sentient weapon, look like a living walking shark, and was partnered to Uchiha Itachi. The last one alone was something he didn't find so strange, however. Despite that, and being an S-rank missing nin of Kirigakure, there were some moments when even he was found something that was weird even to him. He cited the large and creepy eyebrows that a certain ninja from Konohagakure had on his forehead as a clear example. While few things could possibly rival that encounter in all fairness, Kisame believed he had found one. Standing on the desert plains of Kase no Kuni, the swordsman from Kiri found himself blinking several times to make sure his vision was not being clouded. The swordsman detested the unbearably hot and dry climate and absolutely loathed the occasional mirage he had come across. After blinking a final time, Kisame was certain of one thing. Yo, Kisame, mind explaining to me why we're in the middle of a desert? And where is your hot and sexy partner? There just had to be something wrong with the person standing before him. Kisame would have continued to stare at the figure were it not for the last question he had been asked. Uchiha Itachi, his certainly male partner, having been called hot and sexy by a random man, made his mind freeze up in shock. My hot and sexy partner, you say? Asked the swordsman as he looked down into a pair of bright blue eyes that were fairly familiar to him. Yeah. Geez, Kisame, you going deaf, man? Oh wait, I get it. A finger was raised up to him as the man put on an arrogant and knowing smirk. Your mind is still kind messed up after listening in on us that night at hotel in Nami no Kuni, right? Can't blame you though, old buddy. Your partner may seem like a willing mute at first glance, but as you heard that night, behind that wall of solid self-control is a screamer. Come to think about it, I'm surprised that I still have perfect hearing after that night. Huh, good times, Kisame's blue skin seemed to turn a lighter shade as he suddenly felt ill. While he certainly would have remembered any time Itachi got laid, the mental picture that found its way to him was most disturbing. As he shook away the disgusting thoughts from his mind, the Kiri swordsman looked down again and found the man nodding his head up and down sagely with both eyes closed. Don't worry, my friend, don't you go worry at all. I remember that discussion we had. I still haven't put that particular encounter into any form of literature yet. And I won't until the day you die. The nodding stopped as the man glared daggers at Kisame, who looked even more confused. But really, chasing me with Samahata out of that hotel seconds after we finished up and not giving me time to put something on? I mean, I know you're very loyal to your partner and all, but was any of that actually necessary? A simple attempt at the whole overprotective brother speech wouldn't have worked as well for you? Pal, I know I should probably be one of the last people to say this, but are you some kind of crazy? Kisame deadpanned as the man finished. Surprisingly, he soon dropped the glare and took on an exaggerated thinking pose. One arm draped across his chest while the other's hand cupped his chin and his eyes looking up to the sky. Now that you mention it, yeah, more or less. I'm fairly certain that I am at least partially insane. Why do you ask? You are aware that my partner, to my knowledge at least, prefers women to men, right? Really? Oh, that just made all the sex even better? The man suddenly took out a notepad and red pen from nowhere. Now let's see how can turn that into literacy gold. Oh, how about, the audacious male lead discovers weeks after their passionate encounter that his most recent lover secretly preferred the comforts of supple female flesh. Wait a minute. I still can't write this stuff down cause of you. You just had to go and reveal a tidbit of potential brilliance to me that I can't use, didn't you, Kisame? That is just like you. Some biggest fan you are. Who are you? Exclaimed a somewhat freaked legendary swordsman of the mist. At that point, Kisame actually felt that this man was easily weirder than the man with abnormally large eyebrows. The fact that the person was convinced that they knew each other had no effect, however. Right, drawled the man before morphing his face into one of disappointed frustration. You don't know me? Fine, I'll humor you. I am the author of the greatest series of romance novels the Elemental Nations has ever known. I am known by all my loyal readers as the heir to the perverted master himself. I am Kazuma Arashi. You know Jiraiya of the Sannin? Kisame slowly asked. Yes. I am without a doubt in my mind, his chosen successor to the perverted arts. Okay then. I think I'll just get moving again and pretend I never had this disturbing conversation. This has to be some kind of detailed mirage that I am going to hate myself for talking to. With that, Kisame turned and walked around the confusing figment of his imagination which had plainly walked up to him and mentally disturbed him. Oi! Kisame! Where are you going? Shouted out Arashi. To make a mess out of some group of ninjas day. Can I stay and watch? Why? You always make fights entertaining. Fine, but if you get involved in it you better. I get it. Quote, I better know how lucky I am, now unquote. This isn't the first time I've seen you fight someone you know. Sure it isn't. Kisame said as he found a place to wait out the Konoha team arrival, before he muttered something under his breath. Stupid desert and its detailed mirage lies. Namikaze Naruto leisurely walked away from his old friend with his arms still in his practiced thinking pose. He was curious about Kisame's seemingly genuine lack of recognition upon speaking with him. Usually when he and the Kiri shinobi crossed paths, one of the first things asked was whether or not Naruto had a new book on hand. That lack of a traditional question prompted Naruto to use the pen name that he used to write his novels. Even after identifying himself as Arashi Kazuma, there had been no recognition in his friend's eyes. Worse, there hadn't even been the regular Kohai honorific his one-time teacher usually added to his name. The only sliver of their connection that he could glean was when Kisame first locked eyes with him. Even then, all he could see was the faintest sort of having met perhaps once before in the swordsman's gaze. That was disturbing thought, almost as much as waking up in a desert. And just as bad as seeing Kisame without the ever-lovely and dangerous Uchiha Itari. The former heir to the short-lived Namikaze clan failed to suppress a perverted giggle as he thought of the Sharingan-wielding woman. His oldest friend and teammate, first crush, one-time fiancé, and the best woman he had ever had the pleasure of sleeping with. And their last night together still remained burned into his memory. He loved the fact that neither of them ever let themselves get drunk. Being drunk always fogged up memories, according to Ero Sennin. Oi! What is up with the giggling Arashi? Called Kisame from where he had turned his back on the blue-skinned swordsman. Having awesome crazy sex with your hot partner in a hotel shower is too much of a great memory for me not to Kisame-senpai, Naruto said as he looked over his shoulder. For whatever reason the blue man's skin seemed to pale upon hearing that, and he held the short-lasting stare with the Namikaze for a mere second before then turning to look in another direction. Curiously, he also brought his hand up to what Naruto assumed was his mouth. Huh, I didn't know Kisame could change his color so fast. Still cool how he loses instead of gains color when I mentioned banging Itari to him. Makes it all the more unique when compared to Sasuke's response when I first told him his big sister was just as great in bed as she is with everything else she does. And definitely better than when their dad fainted after he walked in on us. Man, that was a great way to end the celebration for me making Anbu captain. It probably was for the best that Itari was not with Kisame at the moment. After all, it had been over a year since their last encounter, and considering he didn't have a bloodline to make a wooden house like some people, there would be a place for them to get reacquainted with each other's bodies. Unless she had some secret fantasy to have sex in the open desert that she had yet to tell him, at least that is. Note to self. File that last though away for my next book. It has potential, wouldn't you agree, Q? Naruto abruptly stopped walking as soon as the thought did. The Kyuubi no Kitsune, the nine-tailed fox and most powerful of the living Biju. The demon that had been sealed within him on his mother's deathbed at age 7, and only rediscovered 3 years ago when he had first began searching for the memories he had lost. Memories that were lost as Orochimaru had forced him to forget much once the Sannin had finished experimenting upon him. Surprisingly, the memory of being the Jinchuriki for the Nine Tails had been hidden away deep inside his mind after the trauma he sustained from the forced transformation into the demon form itself. The very same creature, whose mindless body was now slowly coming apart within him, that was slowly killing him despite being all but dead itself. Even now he could feel the traces of demonic chakra beginning to poison the cells in his body and his own chakra supplies. The seal which had held the fox for so many years constantly now caused a burning pain that spread over his entire body. And worse, what was left of the fox's power was at most only about 5.5 tails of chakra left. An amount that was decreasing at a consistent rate that could not be slowed down by any means. He supposed that in many ways he was quite fortunate for a Jinchuriki. He was the last surviving one after all, and if not for his Akatsuki allies would have been just as dead as the other 8. His only wish was that there had been a better way to stop the extraction of the Kyuubi from his body. Unfortunately, the only way had been to actually cut the chakra transfer after the extraction process had already begun. The result had been Naruto surviving, but the Kyuubi's mind being destroyed as well and leaving a vegetative body behind. Considering that a Biju was a mass of sentient chakra for all intents and purposes, the only thing keeping their bodies together was their consciousness. Meaning that without one it was inevitable that the remaining chakra within his body would either be released upon his death and bring a new weaker fox into existence, or slowly poison him. Regrettably, it had been the latter that had occurred. As he slowly walked up a fairly tall rock formation, Naruto realized that for the first time since being captured he could actually think on his situation. Aiding his Akatsuki rescuers battle the army of ninja Uchiha Madara had under his command, and then the man himself at the same time was a test of his skill and determination to survive. Naruto knew that he barely survived that battle with the living legend 2 days prior. If he hadn't been able to combine 2 separate space-time ninjutsu to make that impromptu trap at the end, the Namikaze had no doubts as to who would have been the victor. Uchiha Madara was far above him in every way imaginable. Excluding perversion, that is. Even with the surprise arrival of Itari on his side hadn't evened out the difference in skill. As he reached the top of the formation, Naruto dropped back first onto the rocky surface. A relieved sigh escaped him as he allowed the bliss he felt from simply laying there to overcome his senses. The rock was at a nice temperature considering its location, meaning that it was hot but not enough to slowly boil his skin if he did not move for long periods of time. There was even a faint breeze that tickled his skin and pulled at his dirty blonde hair. That reminds me, the Namikaze thought ruefully, I need a shower right away, not to mention a nice change of clothes to go. Stupid space-time ninjutsu mess, making my clothes even worse than they were just fighting Madara. Naruto raised his head and looked down at his now near-ruined outfit. The red trench coat he often wore was missing, lost in the fight before he had been captured by Madara's forces. The black, Suna-influenced, flak jacket he wore beneath it was shredded to the point where it only covered a small fraction of his body and was now useless. The black shinobi pants he wore had somehow remained intact for the most part. The right pants leg was missing below the knee, and the painted red foxes on the sides of both legs were covered in enough dirt and sand that they were nearly invisible. The bandages he had wrapped around both forearms had been removed after they both caught traces of the black flame that had nearly burned him alive. The black fingerless gloves he wore on each hand were still in place and in reasonably good condition. Both of his blue shinobi sandals were much the same as well. The thin, but lightweight metal Hitoki-do he wore under the flak jacket was covered in hundreds of scratches and burns from his recent battles. There was even a dent, at the center of a large series of cracks, from where the Uchiha clan founder had managed to deliver a powerful kick that knocked him to the ground and nearly ended their fight then and there. The leather Menpo face mask he wore was in the best shape of all. The only reason it was in such fine condition was that he had only put it on after waking up in the desert earlier yesterday. Slowly he reached down beneath his chest armor and pulled out a black ribbon. After he had a better grip on the black fabric, Naruto pulled out what it was attached to, his old Konoha shinobi hite. The metal was rusted and covered in small nicks over its entire surface. 2 prominent lines crossed over the leaf symbol in the center. One from when he had left his village for good, and the other from when Itari had first found him after that. Not even fighting Madara had the same level of fear as seeing the look of anger on Itari's face for the first time. With a noticeable reluctance to get up, the last living Namikaze stood up and pulled out a scroll. Pausing for a moment, the blonde reached down and picked up a pebble. He then promptly threw the small stone at the resting swordsman who had his eyes focused on the bandaged sword. The pebble landed at his feet and caused him to look up at Naruto with a questioning look. Naruto then made turn-around gesture before pointing first at his ruined appearance, then at the scroll, and finally made a show pretending to get dressed. Kisame made a disgusted sound before turning his head to avoid seeing the curious man change. Satisfied with his response, Naruto quickly placed the scroll down before flattening it out. After making sure there were no creases in the paper, he then raised his left thumb to his mouth and bit down. The Namikaze then lowered his bleeding thumb to the scroll before swiping it across the seals. Immediately the scroll burst into smoke and he slowly stood up. Before the smoke had fully dissipated, he had already removed his pants, the remains of his flak jacket, his face mask, and blue sandals. When the smoke was gone and revealed his new clothes, Naruto was only wearing a somewhat old and worn black Konoha shinobi uniform with a faded red swirl on both sleeves. The Namikaze gazed at the crisp and clean clothes, perfectly folded before him. His father's old clothes, the ones he preferred to wear as much as possible instead of the Hokage robes. Naruto had always felt attached to chosen attire of his father, which consisted of a standard Konoha nin uniform, including the iconic 2 bands of both sleeves, and a Jonin flak jacket. The white short-sleeved trench coat that was worn over his normal attire after being elected Hokage. The coat also had the flame-like designs on the edges that had always fascinated him, along with the kanji meaning, the 4th fire shadow, written down the back. For some reason or another, many of which he made himself, the Namikaze had never felt like he was ready to wear them. Naruto smiled down faintly as he thought of his late father and hero before looking up into the clear and open blue sky. His mind wandered to the questions that had never left his thoughts for long since he left his village 6 years earlier. I bet Dad never saw me becoming a missing nin coming. Wonder what he'd have thought about that. Mom would probably have told me to make my own choices no matter where they led. Dad though, would you be disappointed in me, father? I've had to kill shinobi and kunoichi from our village sent to hunt me. I almost killed Kakashi and Ikki the last time we met. Naruto shook his vigorously to stop himself from feeling depressed and begin to doubt himself. One of the earliest things he had learned was that those who doubted themselves tended to be the ones who never got to get off the ground after they landed. Looking back at the clothes, he felt the urge to put them on for the first time. Crouching down, he picked up his father's Jonin flak jacket and slipped it on first. After zipping up the jacket, he then picked up the white coat slowly. Unfolding it, Naruto held it before him and looked the kanji written on the back. He lovingly moved his fingers over them as memories of the time he had spent with his father came to the forefront of his mind. The pain of his loss still felt fresh to the 22, almost 23-year-old man. Namikaze Minato, the Yondaime Hokage, and Konohagakure's Yellow Flash, was murdered the same day Naruto had become Enbu captain on his 15th birthday. Just hours after he had walked in on his newly promoted son and soon-to-be daughter-in-law share their first real kiss. His father had laughed warmly before embracing his fully grown fish cake, kissed Itari on the forehead, and then pulled them both into a final picture with him. Soon after, Orochimaru had lured him into a trap where Naruto was captured and became one of the Sannin's many experiments. A year later, during the escape of the damned snake crazed, Naruto admitted he had grown somewhat insane over that year. Namikaze left the village soon after, but not before he broke into his father's memorial and took the clothes and scrolls from the family vault. A single tear fell down his cheek before landing on the stone below. Without even making an attempt to wipe the tear streak away, Naruto reverently put his arms through the sleeves and then tied the small orange rope on the front to secure the white coat. Picking up the 4 bands, Naruto soon moved 2 of Minato's bands onto each of his sleeves. Lastly were the blue shinobi pants and pair of black sandals, each made of the same design as those worn by his father. After putting these on, the Namikaze placed the ends of the pant legs into the sandals before wrapping them under some spare bandages in the scroll. After straightening back up, he realized that one thing was still missing. Sighing, he picked up the headband from where he had left it. The Namikaze then pulled his hair up slightly before slowly tying the headband onto his forehead. Letting his hair down, he pulled out a kunai to take in his appearance. To his joy, Naruto looked almost exactly like how his father did, years ago. The only difference he could see was that his father had jaw-length bangs on both sides of his face, while Naruto's own were uneven after having them cut by a stray shuriken. In addition, he also had the fading whisker marks that had appeared when the Kyuubi was first sealed within him. A pity, really. Women thought those marks were cute. Deciding to fix what he could, Naruto used the kunai he had been using to reflect his image to cut off what was left of his own jaw bangs. They would grow back soon enough to their proper length, and then he could be mistaken for a clone of his father. Putting back the kunai in the flak jacket, he then dropped back down on his back, arms and legs spread out. He started to blow on some of his blonde bangs which fell down over his eyes. It was as he closed his eyes that Naruto felt the familiar feeling of boredom creeping over him. "Kisame," the blonde called out lethargically. What was the reply from the feared Kiri swordsman? The missing nin had chosen to wait for the team from Konoha by leaning against a large rock with his precious sword resting on his lap. His head was propped by a single hand as he sat bored as well. I'm bored over here. When are those ninja you mentioned going to be here? Sometime soon, I hope. I'm getting bored here as well. Do you have a bingo book on you by any chance? Asked Naruto randomly. Why do want one? Kisame asked more to pass the time than out of curiosity. Aside from shark fin soup, the one thing Kisame hated more than anything was waiting for a fight to come his way. He much more preferred going out and finding one himself. I want to see who made S rank recently. Maybe I'm on there now. Who cares? Do you have one or not? Naruto said in response, along with an underlying amount of a whine in his voice. Actually, I do, kid. Not the most recent thought. This one came out about 2 months ago. Kisame finally answered the original question. Suddenly a feral grin crossed his shark-like features as a thought crossed his mind. There happened to be a picture of Itachi in the bingo book he was about to toss over. Considering what the curious person had said of his stoic partner, Kisame wanted to see what kind of reaction seeing that picture would get. The S-rank criminal calmly stood up to his full height before reaching into his Akatsuki cloak. His hand found the lightweight book easily enough and soon pulled it out. His predatory eyes located where the curious Arashi had gone to before cocking back the arm with the book. Once he had found the blonde with the mildly familiar blue eyes, Kisame launched the book without warning. Naruto, not hearing a response, began lifting his head up as he heard something cutting the air as it moved. Looking around, he saw the incoming bingo book fast approaching. Blue eyes widening in surprise, Naruto shouted a single word before being struck in the face. Kisame. As the sound of paper smacking flesh rolled over his ears, Kisame barked out a guttural laugh as he heard the man begin cursing him under his breath. For whatever reason, there was something about the Arashi that interested the blue-skinned man. Some part of him hoped that the man was some unknown quantity with S-rank skills that had gone unnoticed for whatever reason. If so, then perhaps the interesting blonde could be a potential candidate for Akatsuki if one of the current members were to meet an untimely end. Oi, Arashi. What is it? You interested in joining the Akatsuki? Been there, done that, had a blast, met fine women, and learned a lot. Say what? Since when is Zabuza down to a lowly B-rank status? The Namikaze asked at the same time. Last time I saw him he was the Mizukage. What happened there? Kisame continued to hear the man ramble about many of the ninja in the book in confused silence. Zabuza? The Mizukage? Arashi a one-time member of the Akatsuki? Shaking his head, the swordsman began to accept that their Arashi was not a mirage. Kisame was not dehydrated enough to have his mind seeing something as messed up as that man was. Turning to face the stone he had been previously resting against, Kisame lifted Samahata up and onto his right shoulder. Samahata sensed a nearing source of chakra that tasted odd to its own opinion. A familiar kind of odd chakra. Oh, so the green freak with massive eyebrows is one of those coming? Kisame asked his sentient sword. Made a guy? Naruto asked as he turned to another page in the bingo book. Some of what the young Namikaze was reading did not seem familiar at all. He didn't recognize half a dozen of the faces that he had seen already, and they were a rank or above. That was too many to be included in a 2-month period without a war going on at the same time. Who? You said, and I quote. Naruto halted as he tried to copy the voice Kisame had. The green freak with massive eyebrows is one of those coming, unquote. I only know one green freak with those kinds of eyebrows personally. Like I said, made a guy. So that's his name, nay? Made a guy. Wonder if he remembers me? Kisame said thoughtfully. Several minutes later, unknown desert in K's no Kuni. Huh, I recognize some of those guys. Who are they again? The one with the bulging veins around his, Neji, I think? Naruto said before flipping back several pages. Ah, yeah, here he is. Hyuga Neji. Blah blah blah. Rank Jonin. Blah blah blah. Master of Hyuga Keke Genkai? At his age? Impressive. And the girl is named 1010. Wait, wasn't she on Itari's team when she first found me after my exit from the village? And who the heck is that third guy? Okay. I know he had to have stolen those eyebrows of his. One guy with those massive things is probably a genetic abnormality, but two? Impossible, got to be stolen somehow. After just receiving the bingo book, the team of Konoha ninja arrived minutes later. Kisame had already shown off his skill with Suishin Jutsu when he used an underground spring to cover the immediate area in his best element. At the present moment the Konoha forces were each on a separate rock for each of them. At first glance Naruto gave the victory to Kisame due to his knowledge of the man who helped him learn how to really wield a sword. With a relaxed movement Naruto turned to a new page with no regard to the opening moves of what he believed would be a short battle. His eyes caught one particular line almost instantaneously. Uchiha Clan Massacre was printed clear legible kanji. The former Namikaze heir's heart thumped in his chest as his blood ran cold. 2 months old, that was what Kisame had told him. Perhaps he had been out of it for that amount of time, it was possible given the trauma the attempt to remove the Kyuubi caused him. 2 months ago Naruto wasn't very update with the goings of the world either. That was when he was being constantly pursued by ninja under the Commando Madara, as well as Konoha Hunter Ninja. During that time he had stayed as far from civilization as possible to plan and stayed in his safe houses. 2 months could have seen quite a few changes. With that in mind Naruto read quickly, desperate to find anything to sat his worry. The last time he had seen Itari was in their battle against Madara, and if she had been wounded she would have returned to Konoha, maybe even arriving as the massacre first started. It did not look promising at all. From what the bingo book told, the entire clan had been wiped out save for one. Uchiha Sasuke, Itari's little brother and his would-be future brother-in-law. Naruto felt his heart plummet as it went out to the boy. Sasuke couldn't have been more than 12 at present. Still the blonde kept reading and was determined to find out who was responsible. He soon found an answer. Uchiha Itachi, heir to the Uchiha clan and Anbu captain. The elder brother to Uchiha Sasuke. That was wrong though, it had to be. With his engagement to Itari, who was the real heir, Naruto had been required to know the names of all of his fiancé's fellow clansmen as well as their faces. He had never once heard of, or even seen, this Itachi. But according to the bingo book he was responsible for nearly wiping out the Sharingan, and his own clan. Finally Naruto came across a picture, as well as the man's current status. What the hell? Roared the now somewhat enraged Namikaze. He jumped up to his feet and glared down at Kisami's cloaked figure. The swordsman as well as all 4 Konoha nin had turned their heads in his direction upon hearing his voice. Yeah? Was the annoyed reply from the Kiri swordsman who returned his stare to the Konoha ninja. Your partner is male. I know that. What the man? That's messed up, your partner is supposed to be Uchiha Itari, not Uchiha Itachi. So you imagined Itachi was some kind of hot and sexy woman when you slept with him, nay? That, don't even joke about that. What the hell happened to me? What happened to the world? Nothing, you're just insane Arashi, that can't be right. You just thought my partner was a woman and not a man, who you clearly insinuated that you had sex with, and that I heard you two together. I have never once heard Itachi do anything of the sort, and therefore there is only one real truth here. You are some kind of crazy. Maybe not insane, but crazy nonetheless. Team Guy continued to watch on as the Akatsuki member they were presently engaged in had some kind of argument with an unknown person. As they located the other person with aid from Neji they all had different thoughts upon laying eyes on him. It can't be. He looks exactly like Yondaime-sama, were the thoughts of the Jonin captain, Maida Guy. This man, his chakra looks familiar. But I can see something odd being leaked into it from within his body. Regardless, I should tread carefully. His chakra reserves are just as large as Naruto's are. Hyuga Neji, prodigy of one of Konohagakure's most prestigious clans. It is strange, for whatever reason, I cannot help but feel that his flames of youth are the same as Naruto-kun's. Silently thought the taijutsu specialist, Rock Lee. He looks hot. Ten said out loud as she took in the man's appearance. At the questioning looks from her teammates and Sensei the weapons specialist narrowed her eyes slightly and crossed her arms. What, just because I take being a kunoichi very seriously I can't act like a normal girl every once in a while? 10, he could be an enemy. Warned Neji before he looked to Kisame and this Arashi with looks of equal caution. Enemy or ally, it still doesn't make him any less easy on the eyes Neji-kun. 10 quickly retorted before seeing the strange man look directly at her. His arguing with Kisame seemingly over. His eyes looked her up and down before smirking as they lingered on her chest. Team Guy's sole female member blushed brightly before pulling out a kunai. I take it back, good looking or not, He has to be a pervert and I hate them. Kisame. Were you even planning on telling me that your partner was a dude? Or did you just decide to not tell me for some laughs? Because Kami is my witness, if you were I am going to hurt you badly. Senpai or not, no one messes with me, shouted the now named Arashi at the disinterested blue Kiri swordsman. Hoshigaki Kisame refused to turn his head in the direction of the irate blonde man. Instead he kept his predatory gaze locked on the group of Konoha shinobi in front of him. No, at first it was because what you said was weirder than what I'm used to. I was in some form of shock and disgust, though that soon passed. After that I decided to hand you the bingo book and let you find out. The S-rank missing nin from Kirigakure showed his sharpened teeth. Besides, everything you told me is going to be loads of fun to tell Itachi about. And I fully intend to laugh at you later, after I finish these guys off of course. No, 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 retorted the white coat-wearing man as he moved to cross both of his arms across his chest. You are going up against me first, my mighty, tailed beast without a tail. And why would I want to do that, Arashi? You may interest me, but right now I want to rip off half that guy's face for not remembering who I am. Kisame said while pointing at the tensing form of Guy. The Konoha Jonin narrowed his eyes as he prepared for the inevitable attack that the Kiri swordsman was ready to make. The Jonin's eyes drifted off to rest on the second unknown person on the battlefield. The blonde man who very much resembled the late Yondaime Hokage, Namikaze Minato. Guy was well aware of the jutsu Orochimaru had used to reanimate the bodies of the Shodai and Nidaime Hokage during the Chunin exams nearly 3 years prior. Konoha's sublime green beast of prey was also aware of the fact that the traitorous Snake Sanin was also an ex-member of the Akatsuki. If he had informed the organization of his reanimation technique, then it was quite possible that the man standing on the rock was the reanimated body of perhaps the most powerful shinobi to have ever lived. That was reason enough for the Jonin to be wary of the man. Especially as the Yondaime look-alike reached down to open up a pocket on his flak jacket. To Guy's shock and growing sense of fear, the man slowly pulled out a modified kunai blade. The man's index finger slid into the ring of the three-pronged kunai and he allowed the weapon to swing slightly on the digit. Seeing that action alone nearly caused him to have a panic attack, especially as his eyes made out the markings on the handle and somewhat thicker length. The so-called Arashi turned to look at Guy and gave him a warm smile as he saw the comprehension in the Jonin's eyes. You remember exactly what this is, don't you, Maida Guy? Well, I shouldn't be surprised. After all, you were around the last time this thing was used, I imagine. Arashi soon dropped his smile and became utterly serious. The resemblance to the late leader of Konoha now nearly complete aside from his lack of jaw-length bangs on the side. The modified kunai was soon thrown in the air and caught in a way that would let him easily throw the three-pronged weapon. Which he did and aimed just in front of Guy himself. Team. Move. Guy cried out as he prepared to guard against the inevitable attack. Never in his years as a shinobi had he assumed that one day he would battle against the legendary Hiraishin no Jutsu, Flying Thunder God technique. The man disappeared from the rock he was standing on, and appeared near instantly in front of the group of Konoha ninja. All present stared in at the red and black flash that followed the jutsu, and as the man stood up, flashing the members of Team Guy a vaguely familiar smile and lifting his right arm up for a thumbs up. Yo, let's leave the formal introductions for later, just call me Arashi for now. Arashi said before moving to bring his raised arm back to his side and then turning his head to lock at 10-10 for a moment, namely chest level. Bring his left arm across his chest and cupping his chin with the right hand. Arashi took several moments to observe the girl before giving her an appraising look. I give them, an 8 out of 10, also a 10 for the cute face, and a 7 for the body. You should try and wear clothing that reveals your womanly figure more often though. From what I can tell it would get a lot more attention sent in your direction. Aside from my complaints for that, you are an otherwise lovely kunoichi indeed. 10-10 sputtered as a bright red blush spread over her face upon hearing this strange, admittedly handsome as well, man comment on her womanly appearance. Oh, and an adorable face of embarrassment too. That's even better, Arashi added as he then took a step back to avoid being nailed by a hastily thrown punch. And a temper as well. I'm not sure I like that one so much though. Shut up. 10-10 shouted as she held a handful of shuriken ready to be thrown at the cause of her great embarrassment. Her anger was returned with a disarming smile of amusement on the blonde's part. All right. By your command, my young and lovely lady. The statement was also accompanied by a formal bow at the waist from Arashi. Seeing the action caused a wave of confusion in Ten and Rock Lee, although the two Jonin remained weary. Both the older Jonin captain and his younger subordinate were most aware of exactly what they had just seen. Guy, from having seen the Yellow Flash perform it himself during the Third Great Shinobi War, and Neji, due to having heard of the Just You from his father as a child. However, the man standing before the team was not the Yondaime Hokage. There were several subtle differences that were now noticed as Arashi stood no more than 10 feet away from them. The famous jaw bangs that lined the sides of the famed ninja's face were missing. Although there were parts of the blonde hair that looked as though they had been cut by a sharpened blade. His youthful appearance was more pronounced, showing that he was several years younger than Guy, instead of nearly half a lifetime older. As a rough estimate, the present Hyuga prodigy guessed him to be in his early to mid-20s at most. Curiously, his eyes seemed to convey a multitude of emotions that none of Team Kakashi's reinforcements would have expected from his outward attitude. They could plainly see the confusion, worry, growing fear, and weariness all trapped behind his penetrating cobalt blue gaze. As Guy continued to memorize the physical features of the man, his eyes wandered up to the metal headband. Eyes widening, Guy motioned for his now-grown students to move back and behind him. His face morphing into one of disdain and disapproval, the taijutsu master fell into his typical ready stance. I am curious to know, began Guy as he focused on the movements of Arashi's body, searching for any indication of a possible attack. Why a missing ninja from Konohagakure is all the way here, in Kei's no Kuni? Upon hearing the words of their former sensei, the other three members of Team Guy also became aware of the slashed leaf symbol hidden beneath the dirtied blonde hair. Neji activated his clan's bloodline and readied his Juken stance. Lee mirrored his mentor's own movements, while Ten prepared to unseal a weapons scroll. Arashi blinked upon seeing the somewhat hostile posturing of the ninja before him. It took them this long to notice who I am? Oh, if I'm right about where I actually am now, then it stands to reason that these guys would have no reason to know who I am. Oh boy, time to run damage control, and especially with that Ten girl here. Last time I saw her I barely avoided a kunai below the belt. With his silent soliloquy finished, the former Konoha Anbu captain slowly raised both hands in a harmless manner. Would you believe me if I told you I was trying to find out where my fiancé was by asking the blue guy over there? Asked Arashi while hooking his left thumb in the direction of Kisame. The Akatsuki member bristled somewhat upon the blue guy part, though he soon relaxed. At least he didn't call me a fishman, grumbled one of the shinobi world's most wanted criminals. The Konoha nin, and the freak with the eyebrows who failed to remember him, paid no heed to his mutterings however. Why would he know anything about your fiancé? Ten asked, voicing the question held by her teammates at the same time. Arashi sighed before looking over his shoulder and sending Kisame a scathing glare. Because technically, he is my fiancé's partner. And the jerk didn't tell me something that a guy should be completely aware of before he starts talking about stuff. Arashi shouted the last part at the now smirking Kiri swordsman. Well Arashi, if you really want to get technical, then technically you started talking about my partner and what you did in Anami no Kuni Hotel some time ago first. I said nothing on the matter at all. Oh shut up, and how do you know I wasn't talking to your sword? Samahada doesn't talk to strangers. For the most part, it's just me and him communicating. Really? I was joking about what I just said, you know. I wasn't. Kisame deadpanned. Eyes blinking, Arashi began processing the new information before shaking his head. Turning back to the Konoha force, he raised an eyebrow as they were all looking at him in an odd manner. Didn't you say his partner happened to be another man? Neji asked, his normally stoic face revealing a genuine sense of curiosity. A sentiment equally shared by both Lee and Guy. But not the female Kunoichi, whose eyes widened as her mind produced a possible scenario. Yes, I did indeed, Hyuga-san. To be more precise, his partner is the, or I assume at least, infamous Uchiha Itachi. Arashi said simply as though it meant nothing. Great. Mumbled Ten, who then sighed miserably before continuing. Why are a lot of the hot guys I meet usually either not interested in relationships or play for the other side? Whoa. Hold up right there, shouted out Arashi as he suddenly appeared right in front of her. Ten immediately stepped back, surprised by the man's speed. How did you get here so fast? She demanded. I'm fast, now forget about that. I'll have you know that statement is a serious slander against my person. You should know that I am 100% attracted to women. If I wasn't, would I enjoy doing this? Asked the blonde man before promptly squeezing one of the girl's breasts twice. Ignoring Tenten's response of nicking his left cheek with a kunai, Arashi's face took a rather thoughtful expression. Huh, I suspected that they were real and I was right. I just had to be certain about that, so no hard feelings, right? The red-faced Tenten was barely restrained from attacking the man by the joint efforts of both Neji and Lee. Guy was about to berate the man for the inappropriate action he had just been witness to when Arashi brought a single hand up to silence him. Smacking the handway, the Jonin glared at the Rouge Ninja. That action was most unyouthful, even for a shinobi who has abandoned his village. True, I will not deny that statement. But it was the best, in more ways than one, I assure you, to correct her on which side of the fence I stand on. Regardless, however, shall I assume that you and your team are here to reinforce another team of your ninja forces? Do you expect me to reveal information about any mission my team is undertaking? I probably shouldn't know. Despite that, I will assume that your mission is similar to that, if not exactly the same. Go on ahead, I have some business with Kisame to take care of. Arashi said before turning to face the Kiri swordsman he was discussing. After picking the kunai he had thrown from earlier, Arashi concentrated on his chakra flow and began transferring his own chakra into the kunai, which he then flipped and grasped in a reversed grip. Guy-sensei, perhaps he is right. We cannot afford to be slowed down if we are to complete our mission. Lee informed his mentor as Arashi pulled out a second kunai and repeated his action with it as well. Now holding two of the kunai in the same manner, the blonde spoke up again. That sword of his eats up chakra, so my chakra blades should be able to match it as long as I keep channeling a steady amount through my kunai. Get going while I keep him busy, ordered Arashi in a commanding tone without looking over his shoulder. I can take care of myself, after all, I used to be an Anbu captain. Anbu? If he really is an Anbu, and a captain at that, why am I not aware of this man? Any time an Anbu abandons the village, all Jonin are made aware of it as soon as the Hokage is made aware. Who is he? Guy wondered silently before reluctantly nodding his agreement. Lee was right. Kakashi and his team needed reinforcements if they were going to be able to rescue the Cage alive. Despite feeling uneasy at allowing a missing nin who could use the Yondaime Hokage's trademark jutsu to be at the backs of his team, Guy gave the order to move one. Kisame made no moves to halt them, however, as he also prepared to battle the strange Arashi. The blonde man raised both of the three-pronged kunai at arm's length and smirked at the Kiri missing nin. The blue-skinned man smirked in turn before hefting the massive bandaged blade from its resting place on its shoulder. The battle began the instant Samahata was plunged deep into the rock Kisame was standing on. Naruto was admittedly curious as to reasoning behind Kisame driving his sword into a rock. His questioning was soon given an answer as his instincts kicked in and warned him to roll to the left. As his body began to move of its own accord, he heard the sound of something coming up from beneath the water reached his ears. The blonde felt the small spray of water droplets striking the rock and his own uncovered skin en masse. As he completed his roll, Naruto's blue eyes caught the unmistakable wrappings of Samahata. A second rush from the water alerted him to another danger that he had no time to dodge. As a second blade came into his field of vision, Naruto was surrounded by a cloud of smoke. The moment the second blade crashed through the smoke and into the ground where the blonde had once been, the Namikaze reappeared behind one of the two Mizu Bunshin. With an almost untraceable flick of the wrist, his two kunai were launched at the back of the clones' necks. Both clones collapsed in a small torrent of water droplets. Kisame, however, did not wait for the water to fall to the ground before flying through hand seals. Stopping at the hair seal. Naruto's eyes widened as he quickly twisted in the air before he landed. What he saw was a maliciously grinning Kisame Mizu Bunshin whose front palms were facing outwards at him. Suiten. Suiro no Jutsu, water release. Water prison jutsu, called out the Kisame Bunshin as the water from its two brother clones incased Naruto in a bubble of water. The moment he was trapped, however, the Kisame Bunshin keeping him in place was killed by kunai slash from the real Naruto. Helping his cage Bunshin up to its 2 feet, Naruto turned to face Kisame. Did you really expect that to work? Was the genuinely interested question from Naruto. The Kisame who had stabbed his blade into the stone simply walked around the bandaged weapon before shaking his head and dispelling, along with the sword. Great, so where is the real one? How should I know, Captain? Asked his own clone before grabbing the original by the arm and throwing him away. As soon as it had saved its creator, the clone was promptly eaten by a massive water shark. Rolling in the air, Naruto was able to land in a crouch and stay above the water. The shark seemed to realize its mistake before finding him and moved to attack its original targeted Naruto. Eyes narrowing, he began making hand seals, beginning with the tiger seal and finishing with the ram hand seal. Suiton. Suikoden no Jutsu, water release, water shark bullet technique. He shouted out before the water around him rose up and formed an equally large water shark. The shark launched out to meet its fast approaching hostile counterpart. Both techniques collided and quickly cancelled each other out. Slowly standing back up, Naruto ran a wet hand through his dirty blonde hair several times before shaking his head quickly to lose the liquid. Come on, Kisame. This is too weak to be your real strength. Get serious. Big words coming from a pup like you, came the reply from behind him. Naruto cut off the flow of chakra keeping him afloat and fell beneath the water as Samahata cleaved through the air where his midsection had once been. Turning around, he disappeared in a flash of crimson and black as Kisame soon went beneath the surface as well. His sharpened teeth showing, the Kiri swordsman began to realize that his opponent was skilled indeed. Well, I did hear him mention being a part of Konoha's Anbu. Maybe that wasn't just talk after all. This is going to be fun, ha ha. As the water cleared up from where Naruto's form had once been, Kisame felt his eyes widen. One of the three-pronged kunai was floating in the water. Out of nowhere, a second kunai with an explosive tag attached appeared alongside the Hiraishin kunai just in front of his face and exploded. From behind a well-sized rock, Naruto felt the spray of water falling from the result of the underwater explosion. The blonde couldn't help but smirk as his newest jutsu seemed to work flawlessly. For the most part, the technique was a modification of his father's famed Hiraishin no Jutsu, minus a slight change in the sealing array. Instead of teleporting himself to one of his kunai, it would use an explosive tagged kunai. The explosive tagged kunai was teleported to the Hiraishin kunai just as it was about to detonate, allowing him to instantly send an explosive attack within inches of an opponent. Considering how it was clearly successful beneath the surface of the water, Naruto realized that he still had to give it a name. His thoughts were cut short just as he felt the rock shaking beneath him. Jumping high into the air, the blonde saw Kisame destroy the rock from below as he was revealed standing on the water once again, landing a good 200 feet away from the swordsman. You know what, began Naruto as he came to a standing positioning again. I'm starting to think you're not the real Kisame. Your jutsu seem kind of weaker than what they should. Really? Then how strong should my jutsu be then, Arashi? Strong enough to make me sweat at least. Strong enough make me go all out at best. They aren't even near the at least mark. I think you can't have more than 40% of the real Hoshigaki Kisami's chakra levels. Naruto said calmly. To his surprise, Kisame began a completely real bout of laughter. Raising an eyebrow, the blonde began to rub at the back of his head with one hand. Was it something I said? No, nothing at all, Arashi. Kisame said between attempts to control his laughter. Shaking his head, the Kiri swordsman smirked right at his unusual opponent. But I don't see anything wrong with telling you that you nailed it. I'm not the real Kisame at all, though you have it all wrong on my chakra levels right now. I'm running on more along the lines of 30% of my real reserves. Oh well. Naruto said with a shrug before smiling at the swordsman. He did not have to go all out in this fight, meaning he was going to treat it as though it was one of his spars against the Hitaki Kakashi he knew. Fighting against someone he knew could kill him if he got sloppy, but could relax somewhat. Math was, and will always be, my worst subject. For some reason I keep having to use it though. It's not fair at all, I swear. Ha ha. I like you, Arashi. You're an honestly interesting person, I'll give you that. Kinda cocky, but I have a feeling it is a well-deserved kind of arrogance. Kisame replied as he once again hefted Samahata on his shoulder. By the way, I have to know, what is your elemental affinity? I was born with a strong affinity for wind and water. How do you think I'm able to keep up with you without a Sharingan like Kakashi or an Uchiha? I'm impressed, pup. There aren't many people who can go up against me when it comes to Suiton Jutsu. For the most part, The only ones who have actually did have a Sharingan, Kisame said while he cracked his neck side to side. It was then that Naruto noticed the rips and tears in his Akatsuki cloak. So then, that means he used Samahata to block most of the force behind my explosive tag. He may not be the Kisame senpai I know, but he is clearly just as skilled even if that's not the real Hoshigaki Kisame of Kirigakure. A compliment from one of the 7 legendary swordsmen of the mist? Wow, now I feel all warm and fuzzy inside, thanks, Naruto said before bringing up a thumb to his lips and biting down for the second time that day. Moving his other hand up to his flak jacket, he opened up one of the pockets. A scroll fell out of the pocket and he soon opened it. I think it's time I try and finish this, and I know just how I'm going to do it too. Though you'll have to forgive me for any mistakes you might see. I haven't had much practice with Kenjutsu, unlike yourself. As soon as the final words were out of his mouth, his bloody thumb had slid across the entire seal. The scroll burst into a cloud of smoke after he threw it into the air. Stepping back, Naruto held out his right arm and caught a large sword of comparable size to Samahata landed in his hand hilt first. The weapon consisted of a large red hilt and with an orange fox serving as the pommel. The blade itself was covered in lines that blended together and vaguely resembled something akin to puzzle from Kisame's point of view. What the heck is that? I've never seen a sword like that before, I have to say though. I like the way it looks, pup. Very nice indeed, Kisame said approvingly as he took in the sword's appearance. The Akatsuki member then pushed his own personal weapon off his shoulder once again. The fight was beginning to get even more interesting to the swordsman, who grinned in anticipation of the coming battle as his hands began moving to make a single lone hand seal. The snake. Sweden. Bakusu Shoha, water release. Exploding water colliding wave. Kisame threw Samahata into the air before he tilted his head back. Manipulation his chakra within his body. Kisame released an even larger amount of water. Combining with the water already surrounding them, the jutsu created an even larger and more powerful wave. Finding his way to the top much the same as he had done with Team Guy, caught Samahata as it came back down to his hand. Naruto took a deep breath before closing his eyes to calm himself in the face of the approaching tidal wave. Opening them up again, he quickly summoned up 2 Kage Bunshin sans the hand seal. Hefting his sword across his back, Naruto began running across the water towards Kisame and his assault while the Bunshin stayed back. The clones lifted up their own swords and began a series of unusual hand seals. They soon finished and lifted their weapons behind their backs before bringing them down in a swift slash. Futon. Rigo Kirikesu, wind release, chilling slash. The moment their swords came down, a large wave of wind flew at the massive wave, avoiding the original Naruto by inches only. The wind slammed into the water and immediately began freezing the water from the impact point outwards. The wind chakra-powered attack quickly overwhelmed the water chakra powering the attack and began to cancel out the power behind it. Kisame's face clearly showed his shock as his jutsu began to quickly slow in momentum. Taking advantage, the real Naruto leapt towards the Kiri swordsman with the intention to bisect Kisame at the waist. Seeing what his opponent had planned, Kisame moved his own blade to block the attack. Catching his strike on Samahata's bandaged form and then pushed back, Naruto managed to deliver a chakra-enhanced kick to Kisame's left shoulder, thereby unbalancing the S-rank missing nin from his position. Continuing through with his assault, Naruto then swiftly swung his blade diagonally at Kisame's other shoulder. The Kiri swordsman managed to jump off before the attack could sever the arm entirely, although it did clip his shoulder. The wave itself ceased to move completely as the wind jutsu had finished its mission in halting the attack. Kisame landed on one side of the frozen wave and began to roll the shoulder blade Naruto had nailed. The arm was stiff and began locking up. The swordsman knew it would be a few seconds before the arm was back to par, however. Unfortunately, they were seconds he didn't have as he felt a pair of hands wrap around his waist from behind and hold on to him. Suddenly a crimson and black flash met his eyes and Naruto stood in front of him, blade already moving to stab through him and the Kage Bunshin holding him in place. As the attack came, Kisame became aware of the seal that he had failed to see on Samahata's wrapping. So, this is it, nay. This is what fighting the yellow flash must have been like. Kisame's eyes widened as his mind returned to his body. Feeling his sore muscles, the large blue man began a series of movements to remove the stiffness. Cracking his neck slightly, he looked off in the direction of where his fight against the man named as Arashi had occurred. A smirk crossed his face as he remembered the encounter. Kisame. We're finished now, came the familiar emotionless tone from his stoic partner, Uchiha Itachi. Hearing the caused a mischievous glint to shine behind the Kiri swordsman's eye. Kisame? What is it, Itachi? While I was providing my distraction, I was interrupted by an unknown variable whom I was not aware of. An Anbu captain from Konohagakure. Shall I assume you had a similar situation? Kisame blinked upon hearing his partner's voice. In place of the emotionless monotone, was slight sense of surprise and an undertone of joy. Actually I was, by a missing nin from Konohagakure by the name of Kazuma Arashi. You know, he said he was a former Anbu captain as well. Itachi, I heard you reached that rank by 13, you remember that name from somewhere? No, that name doesn't sound familiar at all. I don't recall hearing about any Kazuma from either the Jonin or Chunin ranks. But Kisame. Itachi? The Anbu was an Uchiha, just like me. Well then, looks like things are about to get interesting in the future then, ne Itachi? Okay then. Was the statement from one ex-Anbu captain by the name of Namikaze Naruto. The blonde son of the Yondaime Hokage blinked as he took in the appearance of the man who had replaced Hoshigaki Kisame. Despite having come to the conclusion that he had in fact not been fighting the real Kiri swordsman, something which the man himself had confirmed, the Namikaze assumed it to have been a variation of the Kage Bunshin as the battle came to a close. However, when he had plunged his own weapon through his opponent's torso, there was no smoke or any sign of dispelling normally associated with clone jutsu. What did happen, however, was the body morphing into a man of shockingly similar physical proportions to Kisame. The man had the lightly tanned skin tone which many Suna shinobi developed if they were in a mainly administrative position. A long line and steady flood of blood cascaded down from his mouth, and his face was adorned with numerous gashes and slight burns. His eyes were glazed and the pupils were missing entirely, leaving the pair of eyes stark white. The hair was even more dirty and unkempt than his own dusty blonde. A possible sign of either being a prisoner or constantly on the move. The fact that the man's face seemed rather thin and gaunt meant that Naruto leaned more towards him, having been a very recent prisoner. The question was thus very simple and straightforward in nature. Whose prisoner had the man been? Considering that while still controlled by Kisame, the man, or was his Kisame, had asked whether or not Naruto was interested in joining the Akatsuki was a good indicator of one possible group. Then again, considering his inside knowledge of the organization, it made little sense. When he had been a member after leaving Konohagakure, Naruto was fairly certain that they had never taken prisoners. With the goals of the Akatsuki leader Yahiko being the end of the Omegakure civil war, and as a direct result peace for the war-torn nation surrounding it, any who surrendered were given two options. The first and most often taken was to die a quick and clean death. The other less common option had been to join Yahiko's forces commanded by Akatsuki. That offer was only extended to shinobi and kunoichi with at least A rank skills, however, and was rarely extended. Then again, he began thinking, this isn't exactly my world, so to speak. Seriously, I just know I'm going to have problems remembering that all the time. Granted, he had figured that out once he had seen the picture of Uchiha Itachi in the bingo book he was reading earlier. In addition to that, there was the now noticed observation of Kisame's appearance. The robes of Akatsuki were not the crimson cloaks adorned with black clouds. Instead, the design was reversed with a black cloak and crimson cloaks. Considering how Naruto had spent the better part of an hour conversing with Kisame before battling him, he felt fairly stupid for not noticing the change in detail. Especially considering how he had been made an Enbu captain at age 15. And while he only held the rank for a day before Orochimaru of the Sannin captured him, Naruto was expected to be able to notice every minute detail of his environment. Oftentimes it had been that alone which kept him alive after becoming a Nukenin. If his hands weren't currently occupied holding up his own weapon, as well as the literal dead weight still joined to it, Naruto would have formed a Kage Bunshin and kicked his own ass for his mistake. That was when the young Namikaze remembered that he did still have one Kage Bunshin still alive, so to speak. He hadn't received the transferred pain of being run through with a blade when he finished the fight with Kisame. It stood to reason that the clone was still around. Raising his head, Naruto called out to the shadow clone. "Oi! Why are you still around? Shouldn't you have dispelled by now since the fight is over?" Naruto asked his solid copy. "Well, excuse me for still living. The hell, Captain. Just because I happen to be a Bunshin does not give you the right to casually use me as a sacrifice. I'm a cage Bunshin that actually has feelings, you know. The clone retorted hotly at its creator. After an additional moment, the Bunshin walked around the body still trapped along his own sword. Crossing its arms, the Naruto clone gave the original a narrow-eyed glare. You have got to be kidding me. Another clone with its own sense of self? You're the 100th one this year by my count, for Kami's sake. Groaned the Namikaze heir before turning his head to glare back at the Bunshin with a matching glare. They held each other's stare for several heartbeats before the original broke off and released a frustrated sigh of defeat. His willful clone smirked before pumping a fist in the air as it reveled in the rare victory over its creator that some Bunshin occasionally were lucky, or blessed enough on their side, to experience. Well, if you're not dispelling yet, I order you to make another Bunshin and kick his ass for me. Kami. I feel so stupid for not figuring out we weren't in our world sooner. Sure, Captain. I'll get on that right away. Actually, I think I'll just lay down and enjoy the clouds before doing that instead. It's not every day a clone scores a win over you after, and Kami be damned if I'm not going to enjoy myself before the feeling disappears. For the love of oh, forget it. Fine, be the smug bastard I usually am. Glad you agree, Captain. The clone said cheerfully before turning to walk off and leave its creator alone. Stupid traitorous cage Bunshin, grumbled Naruto as he turned his attention back to his weapon. The blonde slowly tugged at the massive sword still lodged in his opponent's torso several times. After several test pulls to determine the best way to remove the large mass of Kiri-forged steel, he soon came to an unpleasant discovery. The blade had skewered the man in such a way that every possible way to pull it out would result in him being showered in a torrent of blood. With a tired sigh, the Namikaze wondered why he had chosen to use a weapon he had little practice in using against his Kisame-controlled opponent. If he had chosen to use either his ninjutsu or tanto, then he could have exploited nearly 24 possible points for a clean kill. Both were weapons he had used successfully since he first became a Chunin, and were designed for him to use chakra flow quickly and easily. The larger weapon he had opted to use, however, likely ripped apart many of the dead man's internal organs and arteries, meaning that the blade itself was keeping the blood trapped in the body. Suddenly he had a brilliant idea to get back at the Bunshin. And a grin that had struck fear in many Konohagakure ninjas soon crossed his face. Naruto removed one hand from the red handle before gaining the clone's attention by flipping it off. Then he roughly pulled out the weapon. In the instant before the blood gushed from the dead man, Naruto had switched places with his last real active Bunshin. The clone gave a startled shout as it was coated in a layer of blood pouring from the opening in the dead prisoner's body. As it wiped away the blood from its eyes, Naruto launched a kunai into its shoulder, thereby dispelling it. And so ends disobedient cage Bunshin 100. Commented the Namikaze before letting out a short, and in his mind at least, well-deserved maniacal bout of laughter. Naruto then began a leisurely walk forward and bent down to retrieve both the sword and the kunai he had thrown. Placing the three-pronged kunai back in the storage seal added into one of his flak jacket's pockets, Naruto then dipped the sword into the water and washed away the blood. Once satisfied that his weapon was properly cleaned, he sealed it away as well. The former Namikaze clan heir was about to leave the impromptu battlefield before he realized something he had missed. Looking all around him in a haste, he tried to find something he had stupidly thrown away in a cavalier manner. It was with a sense of annoyance directed at himself that he soon pulled out an additional kunai before summoning another clone. What did Ya need, Cap? Was as far as the clone got before noticing his creator's grim expression. As the Bunshin raised his arms up in an attempt to protect itself, a kunai found struck it between the eyes. A popping sound and smoke later, and Naruto had taken out a second one of his own clones in a single hour. That felt most refreshing in my own humble opinion, Naruto said before shaking his head in momentary amusement. Who am I kidding, that felt great. With the growing annoyance controlled, the young Namikaze began to gather his chakra. Forming one of his staple hand seals, he soon closed his eyes and expanded his chakra throughout the water. He could still feel traces of Kisame's own chakra within the small lake of water surrounding him. With practiced movements he cleared his mind and began to will his own chakra to overpower the remnants Kisame had left behind. The dual elemental user slowly felt himself gaining more and more control over one of his primary elements. The action proved infinitely easier with the Kiri swordsman and water master miles and miles away and no longer exerting any form of control over the liquid. Once he obtained sufficient control of his element, it was fairly simple to return the water back to the underground spring where Kisame had used his own nature manipulation to bring up to the surface. Opening his cobalt blue eyes, Naruto exhaled his breath slowly as his chakra returned back to him. While he may have had an affinity for water, the Namikaze had a difficult time manipulating large amounts of it in the manner he had just done. He theorized that it was the same reason why it had been so unbearably difficult to climb trees and surfaces of water after he became the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, the massive amount of chakra. Although it may have been because he had also been born with a larger than normal amount of chakra as well. The point was that up until he had become a Chunin and began to practice controlling his dual affinities, he had terrible chakra control. Even years after starting his training to control water under an Anbu known as Yamato, it was still somewhat difficult for him to control the amount of chakra he released to manipulate the water around him. Nevertheless, he felt happy enough that he could manipulate water as fast as he did. Wind was twice as difficult to master and required him studying directly under Shimura Danzo from his 11th year right up to the year before making Anbu captain. Smiling slightly at the thought of his perfectionist old warhawk of a wind instructor, Naruto then formed one of his most often used hand seals. Almost instantly 100 bunshin appeared in a circle around him on the quickly drying desert ground. The original Naruto soon used an E-rank jutsu to project his voice enough for them to all hear him at once. As long as he could remember, the blonde had always hated having to repeat anything he said. Spread out over the whole area of our little skirmish and find my Hiroshin Kanai. I was a bit more reckless than usual this time around, and well, we need them and I'm too damn lazy to look for them myself. You guys do it for me, all right? Naruto informed the mass of clones surrounding him. He waited a full minute for any possible questions before waving the force off. All 100 disappeared in a swirl of leaves and left the original all alone. Narrowing his eyes, he looked around for any bunshin who had developed a will of their own much like the one from earlier. Noticing the lack of any smart-mouthed comments, the blonde Namikaze nodded to himself in approval. Damn, I really have to figure out exactly how some of them get like that. Not knowing which of my clones may or may not obey me is really troublesome. Great, now I feel like Inara. His eyes looked up at the blue sky above him and blinked several times as he noticed there were no clouds above him. Shrugging his shoulders, and not caring about possible sunburn, Naruto looked around for several moments once again. His eyes stopping at the same rock formation which he had rested on up until he had chosen to fight Kisame. Deciding it was as good a place as any for him to wait up until his clones found the missing kunai, Naruto shunshined towards it. Coming out of the shunshin on his feet, the blond man dropped to the ground and closed his eyes. The Namikaze opened his eyes and he found himself in a tranquil and lush forest of tall trees. It reminded him of the forests around Konohagakure, although grown to a much larger size. Getting up to his feet, Naruto took in his surrounding before looking upwards and into the nighttime and clear sky. It had been months since the last time he had been in this forest. The forest was his own mental concept of the prison for the Kyuubi no Kitsune sealed within him. Craning his neck around, the blonde could see the mile-high mountains that lined the forest and had kept the Kyuubi sealed since his 7th birthday. From the distance he could make out the massive seals carved into the very rock itself that prevented the fox from exerting too much influence of Naruto's actions. Occasionally the Namikaze allowed the seal to open up somewhat when he went up against genjutsu users. During such encounters he found himself using the anger and bloodlust as an anchor which he could focus his thoughts around and break the jutsu. Despite certain short blanks in his earlier memories, thanks in no small part to Orochimaru Teme, Naruto was fully aware how utterly vulnerable he was against any genjutsu greater than a low B rank. At first he had been forced to physically harm himself in extremely painful ways to break free. Then in a entirely accidental, dangerous situation he had found himself in the blonde unconsciously tapped into the dark emotions and thoughts that were the Kyuubi no Kitsune's own. Instinctively he found a way to take these negatives and turned them into a means to refocus his mind and break any high-level genjutsu placed on him. Although he remembered how that use of the Biju's chakra was ended once he was placed on a team with a Sharingan, and therefore genjutsu, mistress. Eventually he had been able to teach himself how to resist all but the most powerful of such illusions, using the Kyuubi only against powerful A rank and above genjutsu. By the time he had rediscovered the powerful Kitsune after a particularly vicious and difficult battle, it had ranted for nearly a week about how ticked off at him it was. Then over a period of years Naruto managed to form a shaky partnership with his Biju that for the most part was to the liking of both parties involved. After the Namikaze had become a Nukenin and made contact with the Fox once again for the first time in years, their agreements were in dire need of repair and altercations. He and the Fox had reached an understanding in that upon his death he would release the Kyuubi back into the world, while the Biju would willingly offer aid to him. The young Namikaze was not foolish enough to make the agreement without certain promises from the great Fox, however. In exchange for their agreement he had requested the greatest of tailed beasts to swear an oath to never threaten the home of any member of his family, Namikaze, Uzumaki, or any children he had with Itari. The Fox had been extremely agitated by the terms Naruto had offered it, although the promise of freedom proved too much for it to resist for long. Naruto was pleased to know as well that a kitsune never breaks a promise once made. While the Kyuubi could trick people, it could never directly outright lie to them as well. Using that bit of knowledge he had managed to outmaneuver the Kyuubi and force it into a position where it had no choice but to agree to his demands before he had sealed the deal. The Fox made no attempt to hide its contempt for him and the deal Naruto forced on it, although it did eventually swear to uphold their deal for as long as his line walked the elemental nations. Not that whatever deal they had settled on truly mattered anymore, since he had been captured by Uchiha Madara and his army of shinobi. The Kyuubi was nearly taken away from him completely, and all that was left was a rotting corpse sealed in his body. With the end of his fight against Kisame, the Namikaze finally decided to go and see with his own eyes the body itself. The sooner he got it over with, the sooner he could try and find anything that he could possibly salvage from the remaining tail's worth of chakra the Kyuubi had left behind. At the very least he could create another sealing array to reduce the pain he felt from the disappearing demonic chakra at its source. Naruto knew where the Fox could usually be found within the prison his mindscape created for the beast. More often than not the Kyuubi could be found lounging along the banks of a large lake in the center of the forest. His Biju had preferred the cooler temperatures the lake provided and had created an underground burrow less than half a mile away. Considering the massive size of the nine-tailed beast, however, the distance was more or less a minute's worth of walking between its burrow and the water. The blonde soon took to the treetops of the forest and began moving at an average pace for a ninja in the direction of the lake. As he approached his destination, Naruto could feel the faint traces of decay in the forest itself. The smell of rot and death became more noticeable as the trees themselves began to look more and more diseased the farther into the forest he moved. Obviously, whatever state the Kyuubi was in, the Fox clearly had a more significant effect on his mindscape than he had previously cared to assume. He grimly wondered how his mind would look once the empty body of the Biju was completely gone. More than likely it would be nothing at all, considering that it would likely only fully disappear once he himself was dead. Naruto viciously chased away such grim and unhealthy thoughts. The blonde had never once cared for his own mortality, and he would be forever damned if he started literally inside his mind. Naruto was of the mindset that he would die when he died and nothing would change that. The blonde was also of the belief that the best way to live was as though each day was to be his last. Once he began thinking along that train of thought, he realized that there was really little else different from how his life normally was. Nevertheless, he would not change any part of how he lived his life, no matter how much shorter it was fast becoming. He was after all Namikaze Naruto, son of the Yondaime Hokage Namikaze Minato and his wife Namikaze Kushina, ex-Anbu captain, and one of the most infamous missing nin in the Bingo book. The Elemental Nation's second super pervert, author of the Icha Icha killer novel series known as Karaku no Kuni, last of the Namikaze clan and fiancé to one of the most attractive and powerful women in the known world. A prankster and one of the most zealous, some had even labeled him a fanatic, believers in the will of fire. His life would always be filled with more battles and adventures than most ever saw in a lifetime. Naruto had never lived a simple life in his nearly 22 years among the living. He was always on the move, always setting a new goal or standard to reach, and never stopped giving his absolute best. Dying had no place on his list of things to worry about because there was another certainty alongside his near-certain inevitable death. The fact that he would make sure that when he died it would not be quietly and most certainly end his tale with a bang, and possibly after one last wild night with good company. Feeling one of his well-known grins coming to his face again, Naruto doubled his speed. The sooner he reached his target, the sooner that he could go about regaining much of his lost strength. The Namikaze knew very well that he could be labeled as an arrogant ass for his opinion on his own skill, but he truly did not give a damn. Considering who his parents were, who his teachers were, what near legendary jutsu he knew and improved upon, as well as what he had survived against, and the perverted teacher he had beat several times, Naruto was certain he deserved to be a little full of himself on occasion. Before being captured by Madara's forces, the blonde man guessed himself to be cage level easily. Although he knew full well that he wasn't anywhere near his old strength at the moment. With the injuries he had sustained in his fight against Madara himself, as well as the nearly successful attempt at removing the Kyuubi from him, he doubted that he was any more powerful than mid-high Jonin now. He would have to be even more cautious since he could no longer count on the also weakening healing powers gifted to him by containing his Biju. Worse, considering that this was an entirely different world, there was a chance that Uchiha Madara himself was around and active as well. Perhaps even more powerful than the one from his world. Naruto would not allow himself to go down without a fight if he met the Uchiha once again. If he wanted to have a chance at ending his life, however, he would need to find a way to regain most of the strength he had lost. The young Namikaze had an idea for how to go about that, and that was why he had chosen to enter his mindscape now. If he could find a way to make his idea work, then maybe Orochimaru's experimentations on him wouldn't be as great a nightmare to him as they still were. He felt his arm move unconsciously towards his heart and forced the limb to stop. Soon he reached the lake and then dropped to the forest floor. Slowly he continued on until coming to a stop at the edge of a new crater. The crater was easily 2 miles in diameter all around and half a mile at its deepest. The lake was no longer present, and he could not even feel the cooler climate that normally pervaded over the immediate area of the lake. And located at the center of the crater was a large mass of pale orange fur. The large red eyes seemed glazed and lifeless and utterly alien compared to what he was accustomed to with the Kyuubi. Its body laid on its side with its limbs spread out like a child's rag doll. There was, however, one discomforting and blatantly obvious difference between what had once been the most feared of the Biju and what was presently wasting away at the bottom of a crater he suspected to have once been its burrow. Where once there had been 9 large tails, there now remained 5 full-sized tails and 1 half-sized tail. The smallest seemed to be growing steadily smaller as well. The blonde slowly knelt down at the edge of the crater and brought his right hand to his lips. Biting down on the thumb, he pulled it away from him to look at the blood seeping from the small wound. Normally, the blood would have stopped within moments after the wound was healed. However, the bleeding continued unaided for far longer than usual before the small bite had healed at last. With a sigh, he bit the thumb once again before bringing his hand down to make a circle large enough to contain a person of his height. Biting his thumb after the bleeding began to again slow, he then drew a second circle in the center, surrounded by 5 smaller ones. Each of the 5 smaller circles contained a different kanji: Kaden, Raiden, Doden, Suiden, and finally Futon. Stepping back up, Naruto made his way out of the larger outside circle, careful not to alter any of the seals he had just placed down. He then slowly slid himself down the side of the crater to the bottom. Without wasting any amount of time, the Namikaze pulled out a small piece of sealing paper before adding on a complex transfer seal. Coming to a halt before the mass of orange fur, Naruto craned his neck enough for Cobalt to meet blood-red lifeless eyes. The eyes had tracked his movements sluggishly, with only muscle memory compelling the body to do so. So then, this is all that's left of the Kyuubi no Kitsune, most powerful of all tailed beasts. Naruto said silently while he continued to gaze upon the body of a once mighty creature. You know what, you damned fox? Somehow I just know that you're laughing your furry ass off knowing what your corpse is doing to me. You were so worried about me dying, you never thought about what would happen to me if you just went and left. Now your empty shell is falling apart and it's going to kill me by slowly, and you would have enjoyed this, painfully poisoning me. Slowly he moved his hand up and then towards the massive snout of the Biju. Despite knowing full well that its mind was destroyed, Naruto could easily fathom the Kyuubi finding a way from beyond the grave to still manage to bite off his arm if he touched it. The fox was always mentioned that anything that happened in his mindscape would have no affect on his outside body. Ergo it had tried to eat him on several ventures into his mind. It was for that reason that he cautiously reached out to touch the beast. Much to his great relief, his arm was still attached to himself once it came into contact with the Kyuubi's snout. Breathing a sigh of relief, Naruto leapt onto its head, landing in front of the fox's forehead where he placed the sealing paper. Stepping away, Naruto pulled out two kunai similar to his Hiroshin in that they also had seals covering the metal. He connected the two blades with 5 separate chakra strings and then moving them to make sure they were properly joined. With a slight intake of breath, Naruto swiftly turned to throw one into the smaller central circle before plunging the other into the sealing paper he had placed on the kyuubi. The seal he had placed on the paper soon began to move and wrap themselves around the length of the kunai. Soon he felt the remaining chakra of the kyuubi become fully active once again. In quick succession he was assaulted by the full might of the poisonous chakra that was being released into his body. The Namikaze doubled over in pain as he felt his own chakra burning his insides as he struggled to breathe in the face of the foul power. Painfully he formed the ram seal and fought through the pain to begin molding his chakra for one jutsu, while preparing himself to suffer through the pain for as long as it took for him to finish what he came to do. Before he began his jutsu, Naruto grasped the kunai nearest him with one hand, while doing the same with the chakra strings. Fuinjutsu. Gogyu Seishitsu Henka Butsutekiryutsu, Sealing Techniques. The 5 elements nature transformation physical distribution. What he would attempt to do now was unheard of, something that no one had ever even thought of doing. Then again, creating something new that by all means should have been impossible was in his blood. After all, he was a Namikaze. With any luck, the seals he had laid out before now would drain away much of the remaining kyuubi chakra, and hopefully either slow down the poisoning or at least dull the constant throbbing pain. If his luck held out, then he would have his way to regaining cage-level strength once again. That or speed up the poisoning even more. "Oi! Captain, wake up!" The deafening shout was accompanied by a none too gentle kick to the ribs, and then by an even louder cry of pain. "What the hell?" shouted out Naruto while also nursing his injured side as he slowly pushed himself to his feet. Glaring at the dozens of cage bunshin surrounding him, Naruto forced himself to calm down. Looking around, he soon spotted a clone of himself who looked more pleased than his 99 clone brothers. Pushing through the mass of solid clones, he soon stood before the cheery-looking copy of himself. Holding his hand out, the original waited patiently for the familiar metallic texture and weight of his custom-made kunai. Captain?" the bunshin asked curiously while standing in front of its creator. Naruto developed a small number of tick marks while forcing himself to remain calm. Occasionally some of his bunshin were logically going to be less attentive than the others he usually created. It was for that reason alone that Naruto didn't decide to just destroy the entire lot of them. He'd only had enough time to finish one of the 6 seals he had planned to leave behind surrounding the kyuubi's body. "You lot interrupted me in the middle of something very important. So, you better have found our kunai," Naruto ground out between gritted teeth. The clone blinked several times before its eyes widened in understanding. Reaching into its flak jacket, the bunshin pulled out the 3 Hiroshin kunai that Naruto had used against Kisame. He could see the explosive marks on one of the 3, slightly burned metal and barely visible seal markings. Nodding his head, Naruto quickly placed 2 of the 3 kunai back into the storage seal he had set up within one of his flak jacket's pockets. He soon noticed, however, a change in the position of their shadows. Looking up at the sun, he saw that it had moved farther away from where it had been when he first closed his eyes to enter his mindscape. "How long have I been asleep?" 1 hour, 35 minutes. The clone standing in front of him answered after a moment of thought. "Well, I say we have a vote to decide what to do from here on out for the day," called out another one of the cage bunshin. "Forget it. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I want all of you to dispel immediately," Naruto said in the same tone he had used while in his Akatsuki after several more moments of thought. "Yes, Captain." Left alone once again, Naruto lifted up the single kunai he had kept in his hands. The sunlight reflected brightly against the slightly smudged steel. He wondered exactly where he would be appearing once he used his father's jutsu this time around. When he had taken the liberty to grope the female kunoichi on Maeda Gai's team, Naruto had not done so just out of some perverted desire. He had also used the moment of contact to plant a jutsu shiki, technique formula, seal on one of the girl's kunai she held. He only hoped that wherever she was, she wasn't in pieces. He had seen what happened to any teleportation if someone messed around with it. Thankfully it had been an enemy Jonin he'd tried to teleport away from one of his allies. Once he had sent the Jonin away, the body had never been found. Closing his eyes, Naruto willed the jutsu shiki to bring him to it. When they had opened again, he saw a vaguely familiar figure expanding to a large and grotesque size past several trees. Blonde hair and a slashed Iwa headband, and what looked like a clay bird behind it. Deidara, and oh boy, that's his suicide move. As the Iwa Nukanen exploded, Naruto had gripped the Hiroshin kunai and threw it. Forming a short series of hand seals as the kunai sailed through the air, Naruto pictured the desert he had just been in before taking a breath. Jikukan Kekai, space-time barrier. The kunai glowed a bright crimson and black before quickly turning into a flash. After the flash, the explosion had disappeared. As Naruto blinked away the dots from his eyes, he soon became aware of several pairs of eyes on him. One happened to belong to a shinobi with familiar gravity-defying silver spikes of hair and single Sharingan. Looking at the face of one of his father's surviving genin, an older brother figure, brought a smile to Naruto's face. After reappearing next to the kunai he had just thrown, the Namikaze slowly picked it up before sliding his index finger through the ring at the end of it. Turning to face the crown of widened eyes, Naruto began to casually swing the three-pronged weapon while he walked up to the crowd of Konoha shinobi and kunoichi, as well as the elderly Suna woman and red-haired young man, and lastly a blonde boy wearing a frightening orange and black combination. The faces of Team Guy all stared at him in various types of apprehension. He stopped at Tenten for a moment, continuing on. Naruto gave her another look, taking in her sweaty and battle-weary appearance before giving her a flirtatious smile. As yet another blush appeared over her face, the Namikaze pointed at the tree he had appeared next to, more specifically the kunai possessing the same seals as his own custom ones. Taking the advantage of the weapon specialist's distraction, Naruto quickly placed a kiss to her left cheek and causing her to eep, before looking even more embarrassed. After mouthing the words, "For keeping my seal," to her, he took several steps nearer to Kakashi before stopping a second time. "Been a while since the last time we met, ne Kakashi?" Naruto greeted one of his oldest friends warmly before noticing the young appearance of the pink-haired kunoichi. "The other two Konoha nin not with Guy, are they your genin students? I have to say I never took you for the teaching sort." Kakashi's eyes continued to stare unashamed at the blonde man standing before him. Naruto could see that behind his face mask the silver-haired jonin was opening and closing his mouth repeatedly. "Namikaze-sensei? Nope, I'm his son, and the name is really Namikaze Naruto." Kakashi's reaction was much the same as nearly any man in his shoes would have. He fainted, either from shock or exhaustion. The conscious and living members of Team Kakashi and Team Guy were flabbergasted. Just moments ago they had been in danger of being consumed in the suicidal last attack of an Akatsuki member, only to see the explosion vanish with a flash of crimson and black. Then a white short-sleeved coat-wearing shinobi entered the clearing and picked up a strange kunai before speaking with Team Guy's female member. After that the man had said a few words to an exhausted Sharingan wielder before proclaiming himself a Namikaze, and becoming the reason for an experienced jonin fainting on the spot. The Namikaze continued to stare for several more seconds at the fallen form of the silver-haired jonin. He caught sight of a decent-sized branch that had been blown away by the Iwa bomber, the Akatsuki S-rank ninja Deidara. Steeping forward, he picked up the branch and pivoted on the ball of his left foot to face the man who was lying on his back in a state of unconsciousness. Stopping nearly exactly 2 yards away from the seemingly unaware figure, enough to escape any reaction, the older of two blondes on the field slowly poked at one of the few non-Uchiha Sharingan wielders alive. "Again, and again. You know what?" the Namikaze said in an entranced fashion. "This is actually somewhat addicting. I can't stop myself from poking him one more time, and then I say, why not one more, and then I lose the will to stop." In fact, a puff of smoke was made on the other side of Kakashi, revealing a second white coat-wearing clone with an exact copy of the branch held by the original. "I get to poke him too?" the clone asked its creator. "Addicting," came the fascinated and somewhat detached response. "Anywhere I want, right? Sure, he's out of it, can't say stop till he wakes up, right? Go for it, as long as you're not one of those clones who developed his own sense of self, that is. As if the world can survive any more of you, Captain, let alone a bunshin with its own life." Uzumaki Naruto was a young man who had acquired a number of titles in his short life. Many were well-deserved for his actions, while others due to misconceptions he could not fault anyone for having. The young genin had been called a troublemaker, a prankster, a dead last, demon, monster, weakling, orange kid, and sometimes hero. The Uzumaki had seen many things ranging from traitorous fellow Konoha shinobi all the way to the monsters that were the Akatsuki. The blonde had met great ninja including all three members of the Sannin, Uchiha Itachi, and his friend Gaara the Godem Kazekage. Even his Jonin sensei, Hitaki Kakashi, also known as Sharingan no Kakashi, was one such shinobi, the same man who was now being poked, with a kami-damned branch of all things, by a man somewhere between his and his sensei's ages and a kage bunshin. Some distant part of the blonde's mind was curious how the bunshin was formed without any hand seals, the part that didn't want to find a stick and join in, that is. The younger blonde ninja's thought process was soon stalled by his fellow teammate, Haruno Sakura. Na Namikaze? As in, the family of the Yondaime Hokage? Asked the shocked and curious pink-haired medical Kunoichi. Like her blonde companion, she was partially entranced by the sight of her knocked-out Jonin-sensei being poked by a stick. Unlike the ramen-obsessed teen, however, she was ready to strike the newcomer responsible for Kakashi's state of being. The only thing that stopped her from closing the distance and doing so, was the name the man had given them, Namikaze Naruto. What were the odds of two blue-eyed blondes being in the same place with the exact same name? Then there was the simple matter of the fact that the older blonde claimed to be the son of the Yondaime Hokage. The now 16-year dead Kage, that is. The Kunoichi quickly estimated the man's age to be just below 25, meaning he would have been roughly 9 years old at the time of his father's death. Then, taking into account that the fourth Fire Shadow had been just 27 himself, the apprentice to the legendary sucker, Senju Tsunade, decided that the claim was not without merit. 18 was an acceptable age, if not incredibly rare, for a shinobi to have a child. The pink-haired woman was still on guard as she waited for an answer. Despite his appearance being similar to the dead Kage, it did not rule out the possibility of him being one of Orochimaru's agents. As an image of the sadistic snake Sannin came to the forefront of her mind, Sakura tensed her muscles. The traitorous missing nin was infamous for his experiments, and he had a jutsu that could bring back the dead at the cost of a living sacrifice. She had read the reports of the failed Tsunaoto invasion after she had first started out as the reigning Hokage's second apprentice. During his battle against the late Sandaime, Orochimaru had resurrected and controlled the bodies of the Shodai and Nidaime Hokages while failing to resurrect the Yondaime. The invasion occurred just under 3 years earlier, and despite his insanity, the Sannin was a genius. It was highly possible that he had managed to successfully resurrect the body of one of the most powerful Konoha shinobi to have lived. If that was the case, then not only was he a threat, it was possible the so-called Namikaze had information on Orochimaru himself. Perhaps even the location of his current whereabouts, and by extent, Uchiha Sasuke. Huh? Oh, please excuse me, the Namikaze said sheepishly before dropping the branch he had been using and turning to face her. To answer your question, I will ask another. Does Senju Tsunade have a flat chest? If so, then I have to wonder if Jiraiya hasn't killed himself yet. Oi! Don't make fun of Tsunade-ban or Ero Sennin, Naruto shouted at the older blonde man. This was followed by a low growl from his pink-haired teammate as well. The shout drew the attention of the self-proclaimed son of a Kage, who blinked as he took a closer look at Naruto. Why are you looking at me like that? Trying to see if my eyes are working fine, or if I'm going crazy again. Not that I wouldn't mind a little right now, though. The Namikaze answered while crossing his arms across his chest. After shaking his head, the strange newcomer began a detailed appraisal of Naruto's appearance. This is going to cause such a headache, but I just have to ask. Are you by any chance named Naruto? Yeah. Wait a minute, how do you know who I am anyway? Without giving an answer, the Namikaze almost immediately appeared before the Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi no Kitsune. Ignoring the sudden intake of breath from Naruto, the taller blonde raised his hand and quickly pinched both cheeks. Ow! What the hell? No way, the man breathed with a disbelieving expression on his face. That's not, I mean it makes, but this is going to be a major headache. Without warning, the Namikaze slumped over Naruto's body as unconscious as Kakashi. The clone stopped its actions long enough to see its creator faint on the shorter of the two blondes. Damn it all, he was right, this is addicting. And then the clone dispelled at last with a sour expression adorning its face. As the smoke from the now late clone began to vanish, the rest of the Konoha ninja exchanged odd looks with one another, except for Naruto, who was desperately trying to shake off the curious blonde man from his person. "Oi! Somebody help me here, he's heavy, he drools too." Shaking her head at the lack of tact from her teammate, Sakura moved to lay Lady Chiyo down before then going to help pull the suspicious blonde off of Naruto. The pink-haired young woman came to a sudden halt at the side of the hyperactive teen. Tilting her head, she chuckled slightly. "He really is drooling." "Sakura-chan. What? It's funny seeing a grown man drool on somebody, Naruto. Even you would laugh if it wasn't happening to you." "Yeah, but it is happening to me. Come on, please. Get him off of me, pretty please." Namikaze Naruto felt the slight change in temperature first as he slowly came back to his senses. Being unaware of his situation that moment, he went out of his way to conceal his consciousness. The blonde kept his eyes closed and unmoving. His breathing and heart rate were both slowed down to a sedate pace. The analytical part of his mind, the one that he had honed during 2.5 years in the Anbu Black Ops, told him that the increased heat he felt meant that he was likely inside of a building situated in a desert environment. Recalling that he had last been in a forest near Kase no Kuni, the list of his potential locations was rather small. An unknown ninja would be taken to the nearest hidden village by the first patrol to come across them, meaning he had very little doubt that he could be anywhere other than Sunagakure. Careful to ensure he did not betray his newfound awareness, Naruto slowly began piecing together his scattered thoughts. Eventually he began to remember the events that conspired to leave him in Suna itself, as well as how he first lost consciousness. A younger, by perhaps less than half a decade, blue-eyed and spiky blonde-haired Konoha shinobi. A shorter him. Pushing that though away for the moment, he continued to drudge up as many details as possible and make sure his mind was not being stalled by any head injury. At the same time, he took notice of a sheet of paper pressed to his forehead and the restraints that bound his wrists together atop his chest, and his feet together beneath his knees. The Namikaze also felt the discomfort of his face and chest being pressed into cold, and slightly sandy, floor. The air felt stale and dry as he took in air. His immediate summary was that he had been captured and had his limbs bound in preparation for an interrogation process. The paper he felt against his forehead was almost certainly a sealing paper set to prevent him from molding chakra for an escape. The cold and worn steel of his headband was also missing, likely taken upon discovering his status as a Konoha missing nin. In addition to the slashed high aid being missing, the ex-Anbu noticed his father's white coat and flak jacket missing as well. The mind of a trained Anbu operative revealed that he was in an interrogation cell at the moment. In response to that, the mind of a Hokage's son was viciously berating himself for fainting and being captured. He heard the sound of a neck cracking, slightly followed by a single footstep closer to him. A familiar and tired voice then began speaking. "You can quit pretending to still be out like a light, you know." "Oh, it's just you, my dear Kakashi. Damn, and here I was hoping that I had been kidnapped by a group of women who intended to sell me to an attractive but lonely high-born lady, only to have their wicked way with me before deciding to keep me as their own personal pleasure slave." What? Even without turning to see the one-eyed Jonin, Naruto knew for a fact that the man had blinked at least twice before answering. Kusa no Kuni is a wild place to be if you don't remember to set up alarms before sleeping outside the capital. Man, fun as that whole week was, I'd really prefer to avoid a repeat. Again, what? Short answer then, I was pulling a Jiraiya in the capital city before I was forced out. The sound of forced down laughter echoed before the copy nin spoke again. You were, quote, pulling a Jiraiya, and you were captured? In my defense, I allowed myself to be captured. Allowed yourself in the sense that you failed to set up basic warning alarms before you decided to fall asleep? Kusa wasn't after me. A second voice spoke up in place of Kakashi, this one younger and more controlled, which leads us to a question. Why is it that 3 Konoha Jonin, 2 of whom are veterans of the Third Great Shinobi War, have no knowledge of you at all? Neither your name nor face is any bingo book published by Konohagakure or even Suna for that matter. You claim to be a Namikaze, yet we know the Yondaime Hokage had no legitimate heir at the time of his death 6th day. He died? When the hell did Namikaze Minato die, and more importantly how? You claim to be the son of a fallen leader of Konoha and yet you say you do not know how your own father died. I find that most unlikely to be true. Deciding to at least remove one discomfort, Naruto straightened himself out onto the floor. Rolling off of his front and to his back, the blonde lifted up both legs to his chest before throwing them outwards and landing on his own 2 feet. Turning carefully to face his interrogators, the Namikaze at last opened his eyes before leaning back against the wall nearest to him. Unlikely, yes, but also very much true, the Namikaze retorted before he began stretching what parts of his body he could. His cobalt eyes observed that in addition to Kakashi being present, both the Hyuga and Maida guys stood on either side of him. He also noticed that Kakashi seemed to still be slightly exhausted from using up nearly all of his chakra reserves. Locking eyes with silver spiky-haired Jonin, Naruto shook his head in disapproval. Kakashi, you mind explaining to me how you, a former Anbu captain, decided that instead of resting off chakra exhaustion you're here performing an interrogation? What would Dad say about that, I wonder? Single eye narrowing at the mention of his deceased sensei, Kakashi again spoke up. How about we get back to discussing that, shall we? Namikaze-sensei did not have a son at the time of your likely birth. The war hadn't even ended by that time, so I very much doubt you to be his son. Naruto returned the glare with an equal intensity as he carefully chose his words, and yet he doesn't know who his father is. I'd have expected his sensei to have told him about his heritage by now. Hyuga Neji then responded by moving a step closer to the incapacitated blonde in a placating manner. With his Byakugan inactive at the moment, Neji failed to notice his fellow Jonin share a shocked look. Deciding to move away from the direction the interrogation was heading, Neji made a diplomatic move. For now I suggest that we move on to our other questions. I believe you will not be elaborating on any more of the statements you have just recently made? Lowering his head in the manner he had seen his father use when speaking to foreign dignitaries, the Namikaze responded in turn. With respect, Hyuga-san, you are entirely correct. Nodding in understanding, Neji calmly continued as he began to take over the interrogation. Very well then. This talk of heritage is of little importance and is not the most important topic we need speak of. Such as, perhaps you will be more inclined to tell us how you managed to come into possession of attire similar to the Yondaime Hokage? Easy answer. I stole them from his memorial. The Yondaime has no memorial. The closest would be his name etched into the memorial stone. Quirking an eyebrow, Naruto looked over at Guy, who spoke for the first time. Tilting his head to the left several hair lengths, he turned his attention back to his primary interrogator. Either there is a memorial and you don't know it, or none of you have ever bothered to notice it. Moving on now, Neji started before looking over at Guy, who nodded once. Exchanging short bows of the head with the Namikaze, the Hyuga prodigy stepped back as his squad leader came up. When you first came up across my team, you were conversing with an Akatsuki member. While you chose to fight him in place of my team, which I thank you for, it does not tell why you were with the man. From what both I and my former student could determine, you were in some way familiar with him. Will you explain this at all? First off, don't thank me, Guy. You would have dealt with him on your own without my assistance. That wasn't even the real Hoshigaki Kisame. It was a prisoner whose body was somehow being controlled by him. He even admitted it to me, along with how he only had roughly 30% of his real strength. Guy nodded as his earlier assumption on the nature of the Akatsuki interruption of his team proved correct. Placing his hands on the sides of his hip, the bowl-cut Jonin continued. Very well then. You also mentioned that you knew of his partner? No, I said he technically was my fiancé's partner. I never once said I knew his partner. Neji decided to break the awkwardness himself. His male partner, you mean? Arg. I can't believe the bastard made me find that out from a book. Kakashi closed his lone eye for a moment before sighing. Looking back to their captive, he decided to add in his own Ryu. My team and our Suna ally came across another member of Akatsuki ourselves. Uchiha Itachi, another missing nin from Konoha. Much like Guy's team, we were aided by our own mysterious arrival. A female Anbu from Konoha in our case, however, our Hokage did not send Anbu reinforcements. Let me guess your next question for you, Kakashi. You want to know if I have any connection to this unknown Anbu agent? Correct. Actually, Kakashi began before looking curiously at the so-called Namikaze. Before practically ordering my team and me to continue on, she told us that we might come across a strange blonde shinobi. Naruto raised his head sharply as he heard what the silver-haired Jonin was saying. His eyes were wide and his mouth was slightly agape. His eyes were full of a mix of disbelief, hope, and even confusion. The Namikaze heir soon glared fiercely in response to the older man's words. He felt his heart beat faster in his chest as he waited to hear what else the elite Jonin had to say. She said, and I quote, "My partner is waiting for the super pervert's next book. Does that mean anything to you?" The blonde-haired Namikaze's lips began moving a moment after the words had left Kakashi's mouth, his facial features clearly revealing his shock as he slowly and silently repeated the words back to himself. Moments later, an eerily familiar grin slowly stretched across his face. Naruto began to chuckle. "They're here. Kami, I can't believe it." His chuckle soon turned into full-blown uncontrollable laughter. The three Jonin sweat dropped as their captive fell to the ground, his laughter echoing through the room. Kakashi and Guy exchanged looks of surprise, while Neji looked on in annoyance as the man continued to laugh. Regaining control of his actions, Naruto slowly found his way back to his feet, traces of his near-mad laughter showing themselves as the Namikaze's body continued to silently shake. Taking several deep breaths to calm himself down before lifting his head back up to lock gazes with the three Konoha ninja. His smile still plastered to his face, Naruto opened his mouth once again. "That is the best thing I've heard in a good while." "Why exactly is that?" asked Neji while narrowing his eyes at the blonde. "Because Hyuga-san, it means that I wasn't the only one who wound up here. Itari and my favorite blue guy made it as well." A campfire burned at the center of a makeshift camp. A boiling pot was held inches above the flames as the stew inside it was cooked. A pair of teacups was to the left of the fire, and large figure sat to the right. The figure appeared extremely tall even as he sat with his knees folded beneath him. The faint light coming from the fire flickered across his entire body. He wore a gray flak jacket with somewhat elongated shoulder padding. Beneath the jacket was a dark blue sleeveless shirt, a pair of matching shinobi pants, and matching blue waistguard, striped arm and leg warmers. Wrapped around his left wrist was a silvery metal gauntlet which had a black fingerless glove attached to it covering his hand. Wrapped around his head was a modified high that expanded around his head to cover his ears. The forehead protector had the symbol of Kirigakure etched into the steel, identifying the village which the shinobi hailed from. A large and bandaged sword was carefully placed against the side of tree opposite to the ninja. Just in front of him was a medical field kit his partner had wisely chosen to bring with her. The man's dark blue skin was a contrast to the white medical gauze he was currently wrapping around his right forearm. A pair of predatory eyes narrowed in annoyance as he recalled just where he was. Exhaling a deep breath, the blue-skinned man's gill-like markings seemed to move of their own accord. Turning his gaze upwards, he caught sight of a smaller figure atop the trees surround the camp. "Damn it all, Itari. Your lover boy really knows how to make an S-rank mess. We don't know where the hell he is, and now we're apparently in another dimension or whatever. I swear to whatever created life that..." His short rant was stopped as a kunai was thrown at his high eight. The ring of the weapon struck the center of the steel, forcing his head to snap backwards, while the kunai ricocheted off of its target and landed blade down in front of the teacups. Dropping to the ground, his smaller companion slowly walked into the light caused by the campfire. The feminine figure's steps contained a fluidity that told of years of training and experience with every movement. She wore the common Hitoki-do armor worn by shinobi chosen by their kage to join the feared Anbu forces of their villages. In addition, she also sported the spiked ninja sandals common to the elite group of shinobi and kunoichi, as well black pants. As she bent down to pick up the kunai she had thrown, her bare forearms revealed that she did not carry any arm guards or gloves. After placing the kunai back into one of the pouches on her back waist, she also picked up both teacups. Turning to face her blue-skinned partner, who was moving his neck in circular motions to release the now stiff muscles, her white cloak billowed in the air as she walked towards him. The taller of the pair looked at his partner's weasel porcelain mask as she began to speak. "The first thing you will do when you meet him again, Kisame, is pull Samehide out and attempt to remove both of his legs. Failing that, you will then beg to know when the next copy of the perverted filth will be released. And then, when you are informed of the date, you will moan and sulk away to find a river to swim in and release the stress you will no doubt feel." "I don't beg," roared Kisame in a mock attempt to defend himself from his partner's light insult. As a member of one of the 7 ninja swordsmen of the mist, and still active hunter nin, the blue-skinned man had a great deal of pride in himself. Even as a light-hearted joke, the jibe at his dignity demanded an equally light-hearted, but no less meaningful, response. "Would you rather I said grovel?" Or perhaps, get on your knees and bow your head before respectfully asking the master, would have been more to your liking? Beg is good. Still, Uchiha Itari was an opponent he could never win against in anything save swordsmanship. Handing her partner one of the 2 cups of tea, Itari slowly sat next to him. Removing the Anbu animal mask she had chosen to wear, the Uchiha woman brought her own tea up. The tallest of the pair did the same, and they brought their respective cups together in a quiet toast. After finishing her cup of tea first, Itari started to speak once again. It's been a little over 4 years now, hasn't it? Without even taking a sip of his own tea, Kisame turned to answer his partner. Oh, I guess it has then. Time really does move fast. A pair of onyx-colored eyes looked up into the night sky on the border between Kei's no Kuni and Mizu no Kuni. A part of he wondered whether or not either her younger brother or even Naruto himself were doing the same. While she had not managed to learn much from her foray into a small village several miles away, Itari found enough differences to know that the world she was in now was not her own. So many things could be different from what she knew, such as how an Uchiha had seemingly become a missing nin, and not just any Uchiha. This world's male version of herself, a traitor to the village that claimed her absolute and unwavering loyalty, Uchiha Itachi. Closing her eyes, she took a breath before deciding to say more. 4 years ago, our villages formed an alliance. To show that they could work together, both Kiri and Konoha selected several of their best ninja. These ninja were partnered with a ninja from the other village, and we were the only one that was truly effective. Nodding his head, Kisame had a solemn expression as he continued where she had left off, and our first mission was to hunt down Namikaze Naruto. Your fiancé who left your village 2 years earlier, and also the same guy who I met a year after he left and helped teach proper kenjutsu. He soon started chuckling. Kami, none of you Konoha ninja should dare claim mastery over the sword. Itari snorted as her partner finished, and not one Kiri shinobi has any good taste in literature. Not even Mei-chan, and she is the only one from your village I admire. Oh, you don't admire me? No, I respect you as friend, Kisame. My admiration is something few can claim to have. After all, not even Naruto has it. Kisame was about to finally drink the tea he had placed aside before pausing for a moment. Achoo! The random sneeze caused him to throw the cup of tea in the air. The content of the cup landed all over the hunter nin and Anbu pair. Looking at his partner, Kisame noted with a tinge of fear that her features had taken an unnervingly blank look. Itari? Speak, began the Uchiha woman in an unemotional tone. And spilling hot tea will be the least of your mistakes this night. Elsewhere, walking through a dark forest, a similar scene played out. Achoo! Kisame? Asked Uchiha Itachi as his Akatsuki partner began a steady pattern of sneezing. The blue-skinned swordsman was unable to stop himself until nearly a minute after he first started. Are you beginning to take ill? Nope, Itachi. Must be someone thinking about me, answered the Kiri missing nin. Raising a single eyebrow the slightest of centimeters, the Uchiha stared blandly at the taller man. Turning back in the direction they were walking in, he said, or perhaps you are getting a cold. I do not believe in that childish concept. Come, we need to check in with our nearest informant. Nodding his head, Kisame soon followed behind his partner. The blue-skinned shinobi soon asked the Sharingan-wielding master a question. Itachi, mind telling me something? Without breaking step, the Uchiha answered, what do you want to know, Kisame? Are you going to tell me how you fared against this mystery Uchiha woman? The Uchiha's partner asked curiously. It depends on whether or not you do something for me. Anything specific? Were you to finally cease mentioning that conversation you had with Kazuma Arashi, I might consider informing you of the confrontation. Maybe later then. I still get a laugh every time I think of it. Back up a moment, Kakashi said as he looked disbelievingly at the blonde man. You mean to say that you are from another world? Another world or dimension, actually. I haven't got a clue which it is honestly, though you get the point. The Jonin continued as if he hadn't been interrupted, where your father, the Yondaime Hokage, sealed the Kyuubi into you at the age of 7. In addition to that, you were betrothed to the female heir of the Uchiha clan, a clan who supported the 4th's position no less, whom had a younger brother by the name of Uchiha Sasuke. Guy began his own summarization of what the Namikaze had told them. Not only that, but you were both on the same genin cell, and your Jonin sensei was Kakashi himself, whom you also saw as an older brother. You also were taught mastery of both your wind and water affinities by Shimura Danzo and an Anbu operative codenamed Yamato respectively. Neji finished up what the two senior Jonin started. You mastered both affinities months before your 15th birthday as well. Upon reaching that age, you were promoted to Enbu captain by the Hokage. That same day the Yondaime Hokage was assassinated, according to your own assumptions, Orochimaru of the Sannin. Soon after you were captured by him and became one of his experiments, escaping when he did so as well. You became a Nukenin and became one of the most hunted shinobi in your world. Naruto nodded as the Hyuga soon stopped. He hadn't told them everything yet. He kept the details of Orochimaru Tomi's experiments to himself, as well as what he knew about Uchiha Madara, and his present condition regarding the Kyuubi's remaining chakra in his body. Those were things he would reveal only in the presence of the Godem Hokage herself. Being told that it was Senju Tsunade of all people who filled the spot of Hokage after the death of the Sandaime had thrown him for a spin. From his experience with the Slug Princess, he would have expected Tsunade to have destroyed the Hokage Tower and replace it with a casino after becoming leader of Konohagakure. In his own world it had been Jiraiya who was made the succeeding Hokage after his father's death. It was his becoming the new Hokage that forced the Toad Summoner to abandon his writing of the famed Icha Icha series, and pass it on to Naruto's own hands hours before his capture by Orochimaru. Guy turned to his eternal rival and motioned at the door. Kakashi caught the message easily and then began speaking to the Namikaze once more. Do we have your word that you won't harm any of our teammates, or Suna allies? Naruto looked at the spiky silver-haired Jonin strangely before responding. I'm a ninja, we're not supposed to be expected to be entirely honest most of the time. However, given who I am exactly, I give you my word as Namikaze Naruto, heir to the Namikaze clan. My father never broke a promise, and I haven't started yet. Really? What about when you abandoned the village and became an S-rank missing nin? Kakashi asked in amusement as his eyes curved into a smile. I told you already, I wasn't entirely sane at the time. I was somewhere between insane and homicidal as that gone on. The Namikaze retorted hotly. Of course, of course. Now I believe it's time to go now, right Guy? Of course Kakashi, my flames of youth burn far too brightly for me to allow myself to forget when we are expected to return to Konohagakure. Guy said before shouting loudly as Genjutsu appeared that showed a fire behind his eyes. Grabbing Neji the Taijutsu master was the first to leave the room, his student in tow. Kakashi soon followed after giving the Namikaze a final eye smile and then walked out the door. Wait a minute! Cried out the blonde-haired shinobi as he realized that they had left him alone. Hey! Get back here! You guys have to untie me. Several hours later the blonde Namikaze walked alongside the two older Jonin across the desert. It had taken some work but the rest of the Konoha ninja had accepted him joining them on their return trip easily enough. All except for the other blonde in the group, that is. First it had started with the argument about the Namikaze apparently drooling all over the Uzumaki, and then it morphed into an endless assault of question ranging from his name to his rank and instructors. Names were also an easily solved issue with the Namikaze choosing to go by part of the alias he had introduced himself to Team Guy with, Namikaze Arashi. I can't believe you asses left me tied up there for 3 hours. Naruto laughed as the older blonde argued with Kakashi and Guy several dozen feet behind him and the others. Sakura sighed as she realized that she was going to have 2 loud and crazy blonde guys to deal with for the next few days. The 2 Chunin members of Team Guy were both listening in as Neji recounted to them what the Namikaze had revealed to him and the other 2 Jonin during their interrogation. Kakashi sighed tiredly as Guy helped him walk. Looking at the fuming blonde, he was surprised by the similarities between Arashi and the attitude of Uzumaki Kushina. He chuckled quietly as recalled a time when the Uzumaki woman had barged into the Hokage's office while Kakashi was being debriefed after a mission. The red-haired woman had said something incredibly similar to his sensei before pushing the Jonin out of the room as she began exacting revenge on his teacher. Although Minato had never complained once after Kushina had left the tower, even having a glazed look in his eyes while going about the rest of the day. Kakashi was very glad he did not hear anything that went on behind the locked doors. Well, Arashi-san, if you want we could tie you up for 4 hours instead next time? Asked the copy nin. Go to hell Kakashi. Go to hell and burn. While he said that, Arashi was staring at his old rusted and dual-slashed Konoha High 8. He'd all but physically harmed Kakashi when he saw it thrown away in a pile like common trash. Running his finger along the edges, Arashi remembered how he had felt when he regained his sanity, and realized what he had done. Leaving the village and fighting teams of his friends sent to bring him back had cut his soul deeply. Now he was just going to enter it despite his status as a Rouge ninja, because technically he hadn't done anything except wear a slashed high 8. Actually, none of the Konoha ninja could actually prove he was even a ninja himself when he thought about it. He wondered if even going back would be worth it, considering what he himself knew he had done in his world. Someone seems to be in a bad mood, Tenten commented over her shoulder as she glanced at Arashi. The blonde had taken to wearing a basic Suna shinobi flak jacket with the shoulder guards above a sleeveless red muscle shirt and black pants. His white short-sleeved trench coat and Konoha flak jacket having been sealed away into one of the numerous seals tattooed along his right arm. Strapped diagonally along his back was a red-sheathed and black-hilted ninjutsu, while a tanto blade was strapped along the side of his left foot. Oddly, he had a strange spiral tattoo on his left shoulder. The girl flushed as she saw him wink at her when he noticed her looking over the Rouge shinobi. The weapons mistress glared quickly before snapping her head to face forward. "Keep talking, Hitaki, and I swear to Kami herself, I will burn all the Icha in Konoha. And then replace it with my own books. If nothing else, this trip is going to give me plenty of time to remember everything I put into volumes 1 all the way to 9 of Karaku no Kuni." "You wouldn't dare." The famed ninja who had copied over 1,000 different jutsu whispered fearfully. Locking gazes with his one-time brother figure before a thought came to the top of his mind. Smirking evilly, Arashi began mouthing words at Kakashi. "I have my father's technique. All I need is a record of all the bookstores that sell them, and the rest is up to your imagination, Scarecrow-kun." At the confused look from the copy nin, Arashi gave the man a straight-faced look. Slowly moving his left arm over one of the seals on his right arm, the Namikaze pulled out his leather Menpo face mask. Seeing the surprised look from the older man, Arashi calmly pulled the mask down over his face, covering his lower facial features. The Namikaze had enjoyed ticking his Jonin brother figure when he first bought the mask, and the joy of seeing the annoyance in that single eye had never disappeared. Smirking beneath his mask, the Namikaze slowly copied the famous Hitaki eye smile with both eyes. After opening them again, he couldn't help but laugh out loud at the expression he could see on Kakashi's face. Perhaps going back to Konoha wouldn't be so bad. At the very least, he could always enjoy seeing the look on many of the people's faces as he found ways to annoy them for a first time. "You know," Kakashi began in a seemingly conversational tone that set Arashi on edge. "What?" asked the blonde Namikaze. "I just remembered. When we get back to the village, Inochi is probably going to have to perform some mental checkups on you." "Uh-huh. Your point being what exactly?" "Oh, it's nothing really, Arashi-kun. Unless you consider the fact that if you're telling the truth, then you will have to become the head of the Namikaze clan. More than likely you're going to have to suffer through weeks of tedious paperwork upon your clan being revived, and probably marriage proposals and the like. In short, politics." As Arashi processed what he had just heard, the Namikaze knew only one way to react. The last Namikaze, the second super pervert, ex-Anbu captain, and son of Hokage, dropped to his knees on the desert sand and raised his head towards the sky before releasing a scream full of despair. "Wait just a second right there," Arashi said as he interrupted a story Naruto had been telling Sakura of his training with Jiraiya. He still wore the leather-armored mask that reminded the two conscious members of Team Kakashi of the cloth one their teacher was never seen without. The Genin and Shunin each had different takes after they had first seen the strange man with it on. Naruto was slightly annoyed that he never thought of buying a mask like Kakashi's so that he could annoy the eternally late Jonin. While Sakura on the other hand had threatened the Namikaze with, and quote, a Tsunade-level reaction to Jiraiya peeping in on her taking a bath, if he ever started reading Icha in public, causing all the men to pale in fear for several heartbeats, until the Namikaze had commented on how it strangely turned him on, and how he would never sully his hands with the outdated literature. That was Icha. He pushed you off the side of a cliff, not knowing if you would survive, I must add, and all because he wanted you to call up some of the Kyuubi's tailed beast chakra? Well, yeah, I guess. Why, were you thinking that's a stupid thing for him to have pulled on a kid? Naruto asked the child of his hero, the Yondaime Hokage. Arashi shook his head before smirking back at the Uzumaki. Stupid? Are you sure you came out of that all right, kid? Because that is 100% brilliant and exactly what I would have done to a student of mine. What? Deaf too? Forget it, Naruto. not like I even had a student to teach. But you better not say that from an outside point of view. The whole thing is really something funny, nay? The younger of the group's two blondes looked back over his shoulder with his eyes scrunched together in one of his usual expressions. A huge foxy grin came to replace the weird look he had before the blonde suddenly turned in midair, landing on a tree branch and facing the Namikaze trailing several meters behind him. Crossing his arms across his chest, Naruto opened his electric blue eyes as his feet pushed off from the tree branch. Now moving backwards, the knuckled-headed genin was not surprised to see the varied reactions from the members of their two-team group. His eyes turned to his right and caught Sakura's amused expression as the pink-haired Kunoichi brought a hand up to stifle a giggle. Beaming that he had made his teammate and crush have a positive reaction to his antics, Naruto turned to look at his Jonin-sensei. And nearly lost his footing on another branch after seeing the silver-haired Jonin reading one of Jiraiya's novels. Both Lee and Guy were overjoyed at seeing such a youthful action in what they saw as Naruto training his awareness of his surroundings. The younger of two even twisting to perform the same action as his blonde friend, with his sensei crying anime tears at being unable to do the same with Kakashi on his back. Tenten and Neji both had equal looks of mild displeasure, as each knew that once they had returned to the village it would only be a matter of time before both Guy and Lee had their team all traveling through the forest of death backwards. Naruto took all of this with the same grin still plastered to his face. It only disappeared once he locked eyes with a pair of now ice-cold cobalt blue eyes glaring at him. Surprised at the shift in the elder blonde's expression, Naruto could not help but squirm slightly under the piercing glare. It felt like the glares that Sasuke used to give him at the start of Team 7's ninja career, and Naruto decided he wanted to know why. "Hey, why are you giving me that look?" The Namikaze responded by pointing a finger at Naruto before speaking, "Because that is pathetic and insulting." "What was that?" "You heard me loud and clear, fishcake," Arashi said in a disgruntled voice. "It's pathetic what you're doing. What if we walk into an ambush because you happen to be goofing off like that? Or worse, what if you were fall off and knock your head on one of these branches and putting yourself out?" "Oi, I admit I may have done that as a kid, but I'm a lot better than I was back then. I won't fall into a trap, so shove it." The two blondes glared fiercely at one another for several moments in a contest, both trying to force the other to break contact first. In the end, the contest ended before a winner could be determined, as Naruto misplaced a landing and began flailing his arms to prevent himself from falling. He quickly regained balance as the rest of the group quickly passed him by and was about to take off again when he felt a firm grip on his shoulder. Looking at the many seals tattooed to the bare forearm, some made of ink and others of what appeared to be blood, Naruto raised his face to look up into that of the Namikaze. While Konoha's most infamous prankster would never be heard saying it, Naruto was in awe of the fact that he was in the presence of the Yondaime Hokage's son. The day after Teams Guy and Kakashi returned to Sunagakure with its Kazekage, the blonde quickly asked Sakura about what Arashi had told them when they first encountered him. After his question had resulted in the back of his receiving a lighthearted bump from his pink-haired teammate, he had never been so glad that she didn't have great enough chakra reserves to stay as active as long as he could. The medic decided to answer him. Naruto admitted to himself in private that he had barely paid much attention to what had been said before the Namikaze had spoken to him, and then promptly slumped over his smaller frame. He was surprised to discover just who had been drooling all over his back on the march back to Suna was. That he was the son of the very same man Naruto idolized, and who died to seal the Kyuubi within him. At first he had been ecstatic when Sakura had told him that and ranted about seeing if the Namikaze knew any other jutsu his father invented that Jiraiya didn't know about, considering that the man had to have been old enough to learn something from the hero. After he had turned to his friend, Gaara the Gondem Kazekage, after the red-haired had said something, Naruto remembered something Ero Sennin had told him. The self-proclaimed super pervert had told his latest pupil how someone traditionally became a Jinchuriki. Naruto was somewhat subdued as he learned that most containers of the various tailed beasts were usually connected to the reigning village leader in some way or another, with the most common connection being one of blood. As an example, the toad Sannin brought up Gaara to better impart the information to his rarely attentive student. Naruto had been entirely unaware of the fact that the boy he had met during the Chunin exams was in fact the son of the Yondaime Kazekage himself. As he came back to the present and again looked over the red and black beneath a Suna flak jacket, Naruto felt a spike of anger rise inside of him. Instinctively he forced the emotion down along with the faint trace of the foul chakra until he was certain that the fox inside of him couldn't attempt a second try at taking over. After doing that he silently simmered, while glaring directly into a slightly shocked Namikaze whose mouth was slightly agape, and utterly unaware that Arashi had detected what had just happened. Inside the safety of his mind Naruto screamed as his glare grew slightly hateful. The young Uzumaki was angry at the older blonde standing within arm length of him, and although he felt that he was being unfair, it was impossible to let the anger simply go. Naruto was resentful of Arashi, and what he knew for an undeniable fact made them different. The Yondaime had chosen to seal the Kyuubi into a newborn baby in spite of already having a son alive by that time. "Is there something on your mind, Uzumaki?" Arashi asked seriously while his eyes held a hint of understanding behind the cobalt blue of them. The older man brought up a hand to cup his chin for a moment while the fingers glanced off the side of a cheek. The teen blinked before the anger was replaced, but as Arashi looked into the electric blue he could see that within the maelstrom of hidden emotions that the eyes allowed a glimpse of it still lived, with a particular grin that both a Chunin instructor and Dead Cage had unfortunately been quite familiar with. As he formed the ram hand seal, Naruto gathered and molded his chakra for something he had not used for a fair amount of time. "I can't do much about why the Yondaime picked me over him, but I can do this." Around the immediate area of the pair bursts of smoke came into existence and revealed 36 cage buncheons of Naruto, all making the ram seal themselves. With a smirk that promised more payback in addition to what he was about to do, Naruto and his clones all called out, "Haremu no Jutsu, Ninja Harem." As the words were spoken, Arashi suddenly lost his serious look and took on a near-perfect copy of one of Jiraiya's most perverted grins as the many Narutos were all covered by smoke. A trickle of blood began landing on the tree branch as the smoke dissipated and over 36 blonde pigtailed women clung to his body, although to his disappointment smoke hid the more interesting areas. The blonde man mentally began taking notes about how he could work Naruto's technique into his next novel. The jutsu offered up a multitude of possibilities and was easily as pure literature gold as Guy was obsessed with the flames of youth, or Kakashi with Icha Icha. Turning to look in the direction of the original Naruto hanged woman, Arashi had a shine in his eyes. "Naruto, this is brilliant. I must learn the inner workings of this jutsu at once." The woman blinked once before her jaw fell in shock. The sheer potential that it has for research purpose. Arashi continued on as more blood dripped down his face. Suddenly his eyes widened and the trickle became even larger as an idea came to mind. "Sweet Kami. I could create an army of Tsunades with this." "Ha! Jiraiya, I have once again had a brilliant idea before you." Meanwhile in the Hokage Tower, Senju Tsunade continued to stare with a rising urge to cry at the horror of what lay before her. Taking advantage of the rarity of actually finishing a monstrous stack of paperwork before her former apprentice could bring her a fresh pile, the Slug Princess had decided to indulge in one of her greatest weaknesses. Top-quality sake. The blonde-haired medical legend had just pulled out a bottle of said sake when disaster struck. She sneezed before a single drop of sake had been poured into her saucer. The result had been the nightmare that the mere sight ensured that she was on the verge of going into an unstoppable rage. Tsunade had thrown the bottle of sake out of one of the windows in her office, destroying the entire pane of glass as well as losing one of life's greatest wonders. At the same time, in behind a fence guarding a hot spring situated in a well-off Kusa no Kuni city, a sealing expert felt like he had lost out on something of epic proportions. The feeling was quickly replaced by fear as Jiraiya realized that the voices on the other side of the fence had gone eerily quiet and a substantial killing intent was quickly growing. Putting on his most disarming face, Jiraiya attempted to get out of danger. "Well, hello all you fine Kusa ladies. I hear your country is gobbling up my latest novel, so might I offer up copies of said novel for each and every one of you in exchange for letting me go?" The first blow landed when he pulled out a copy of his most recent work, Icha Icha Tactics. Apparently Icha Icha was only popular among the country's male population. Naruto continued to stare in horror as the older blonde continued to rant about how brilliant his original jutsu was. He knew that his mouth was still hanging open in a mix of horror and disappointment at the sight of the utter ineffectiveness the technique had in regards to the Namikaze. So far no man had ever been able to resist the jutsu, and it was capable of bringing down a Hokage multiple times over. Arashi was entirely uncaring as to what thoughts were running through the mind of his other self regarding the jutsu he was currently enjoying. A small part of his mind was ranting about how stupid he had been for not creating a similar jutsu for his own use. While he was highly intelligent and capable shinobi, the slight ego he allowed boosted much more. Arashi knew he couldn't copy a jutsu like that without help. After all, he was only engaged to an Uchiha prodigy. He had no chance of gaining something like the Sharingan. Bearing the direction his train of thought was moving towards, Arashi knew he would have to ask for help. Ask for help. From his younger, orange-wearing, and unthinking self. Now that I think about it, it's not really something I really need to know about. I don't have to ask for help from, well, myself of all people. Kami, that is still confusing as hell to wrap my mind around. Besides, it's not like knowing how to henge my own cage bunshin into hot girls is something that will really help out against someone as determined as Madara. I mean, it's not like these are solid. Wait a minute. Arashi felt the blood in his veins chill to ice-cold temperatures. He knew that his skin had turned a ghostly pale, and according to Itari his right eyebrow should be twitching somewhat. He knew that they were the clear signs of him going into a mild panic attack. Already his heart was pounding from inside his chest just as Arashi had realized something that threatened to make him lose what little food he had consumed in Suna just under a day ago. Still, the Namikaze could still ask his Uzumaki double and pray that he was wrong about his assumptions. Naruto, Arashi ground out slowly and with a trace of fear lining the edge of his voice. These girls, they're not, well, solid, are they? Naruto blinked twice with his cute and innocent baby blue eyes. Where was Arashi getting at with that question? Regardless, he decided to answer his fellow blonde's question. Well, yeah. For some reason, all my henges are the real deal. Nothing illusionary about them all. Why? Arashi stood there in horror for several moments as what he had just heard slowly sank its way in. He was surrounded by fully transformed copies of Uzumaki Naruto. Meaning they were fully transformed copies of a younger version of him. Which meant that he was being turned on and thinking like the super pervert that he was acting perverted towards himself of all people. Immediately Arashi felt the blood trickling from his nostrils come to a complete and sudden halt at the same instance that he felt a sense of nausea threaten to overwhelm him. Oh, sweet Kami. Arashi suddenly broke free of the grasp of the 36 pigtailed, and once deliciously sexy, blonde, girls. And his face took on a green look. Clutching at his stomach with one hand, and covering his mouth with the other, Arashi fell to his knees on the branch. Naruto, seeing the sudden change in the older blonde man, quickly dispelled both the henge and his cage bunshin. In a second the younger teen was at the Namikaze's side and on his knees as well, a look of bewilderment and worry etched onto his face. Running a hand furiously through his blonde spikes, Naruto could only say one thing. You're supposed to have been blown away by a nosebleed, not get sick. Oh man, my jutsu isn't supposed to do this. At the word, jutsu, Arashi knew he could not hold back anymore. The cries of one disgusted and surprised genin mixed with the heaving sounds of one ex-Anbu captain and echoed throughout the forest. Far away from the blonde duo, the Icha addicted Jonin that was Hitaki Kakashi looked up from the page in his latest book as his ears picked up a far-off and strange sound. Blinking his one visible eye twice, the silver-haired leader of Team Kakashi craned his neck so that he was looking in the direction where they had left Naruto and Arashi behind. Something caught your attention, Kakashi? Questioned Maeda Guy as he looked up at the man he was carrying on his back. Shaking his head once, the Hitaki turned back to continue from where he had left off, an eye smile already in place. No, Guy. Nothing at all. Inside the confines of his mind, Kakashi was cackling evilly as an image of the pair of blondes being chased by a rather large and fearsome predator popped into his mind. Nobody who threatened to burn his precious would ever get off lightly. Kakashi knew Kami herself wouldn't let karma fail to punish Arashi for what threatened the cosmic balance of that was right in the world. The sole surviving student of Namikaze Minato giggled. Partly from finishing an especially brilliant page and partly from imagining the embarrassment or pain being suffered by the supposed Namikaze clan heir. Several hours later, Guy, whom was in charge being the most senior and capable shinobi present, had decided to set up camp for the night. He had been conversing with his fellow Jonin and both men came to an agreement to rest for the night before continuing on in the morning. The respite from the pace being set by the quirky taijutsu master was well received by Sakura and, to a lesser extent, Neji and Tenten. All Konoha ninja present in the camp soon went about a multitude of basic tasks to set up a sufficiently defendable perimeter for their temporary stop. Sakura herself was sitting besides her perpetually late team leader, the latter of which was currently resting in the center of the inside of a dead and slightly hollowed-out tree trunk. Of all the shinobi, it was her first sensei who was in the worst shape, although the cause was primarily due to chakra exhaustion from overusing his implanted Sharingan eye. The 18-year-old Kunoichi and field medic had forcibly made the Hitaki request a quick in-field examination of his current physical state. The tried and true methods of dealing with depleted chakra reserves were either long periods of rest, or the swallowing of a soldier pill. The sole female of Team Kakashi, however, refused to go another day without personally making sure her sensei only required one of the two, and did not have an undetected injury or condition that the Suna medics may have accidentally missed. After having ordered her patient to remove his flak jacket, she caught sight of a flash of what looked like a necklace for just a second beneath his black shirt. Sakura then told him that he was not allowed to read anything while she worked on him. After doing basic checks that any ninja could do, Sakura stood up from her place besides her sensei and walked around behind him. Folding her legs beneath her, the pink-haired Kunoichi's hands began to glow with a faint green chakra. Placing the glowing hands against her sensei's back, Sakura prepared herself to perform a basic diagnosis jutsu. The very first Tsunade-sama had taught her, in fact. Closing her aqua-green eyes for a moment, Sakura took in a short breath of air before she began to ply her recently learned skills as a medical nin. The immediate actions that would detect any ailments in the human body required the Kunoichi to enter a shallow self-induced trance before she could truly use any of the jutsu she had learned. Medical ninjutsu was perhaps one of hardest of all jutsu branches to gain true mastery over. In fact, only the sealing arts were arguably closer to impossible to master. Medical ninjutsu required perfect chakra control and the learned ability of having absolute knowledge over all aspects of the human anatomy, as well as total control of the medic's own mind in conjunction with the body at all times. It was for this reason why very few medical nins had anything above average chakra capacity and reserves. The actual use of medical ninjutsu, however, was not as set in stone as the requirements were. Each and every medic, regardless of nation or village, had their own unique method of using their life-saving jutsu. Sakura could not count the dozens of lectures that Tsunade had given her that involved pounding. Occasionally there had been times when it nearly became literal, the statement into her very being. The Hokage's first apprentice, the Jonin Shizune, had comforted the girl in the early beginnings of her training by telling Sakura that all medical ninja had gone through the same thing courtesy of their teachers. Then Tsunade had ordered Shizune to try her best at a nearly impossible task: inspecting all hot springs in the village to make them pervert-proof. The slug Sanin then warned Sakura not to speak of her with anything less than what she deserved as her teacher and Hokage. Tsunade had told her second apprentice that her own style mainly revolved around creating a mental image of a great tree in her mind. The tree was her patient and she would will her chakra to enter the tree and inspect it from the inside out. Shizune linked her own method with a chemical lab, using her chakra to find the right balances of everything, just like when making her poisons. The Kunoichi's own best friend, Yamanaka Ino, once mentioned hers as envisioning a massive field of innumerable flowers, and then finding any dead or sick plants for removal or healing. Every single medical ninja that Sakura had found in Konoha all had their own unique methods that worked for them only. She was no exception to the rule. Haruno Sakura, to be more precise the one she had been after graduating the academy, had prided herself greatly on her accumulated book knowledge. The young girl she had been at that point in her life really only had them as her sole advantages over other fresh genin until Tsunade-sama had returned to the village. Despite improving her abilities as a true kunoichi by spades in the 3 years since then, and she considered herself blessed to have been that lucky, Sakura had never foregone that love of books. Honestly, it had never once surprised her that her mental image was that of a medical journal containing all the medical information she had garnered since becoming the second apprentice to the slug Sanin. While she healed a patient's injured body, the book Sakura created would be missing lines or paragraphs, or even whole pages. Sakura would fill those missing blanks with the knowledge she had memorized and then begin the process of willing her chakra to heal and mend any injuries. The rosette-haired woman continued to take in breaths of air in a constant pattern as she began turning the pages in her mental book. A detached portion of her mind thought it fitting, in a sad and mildly funny way, that the book had a familiar orange cover. Thankfully, the only thing inside the book were volumes of medical knowledge accumulated over the majority of her ninja career instead of the porn her perverted sensei so coveted that was written by her other teammates' own, even more so than the famed copy nin, perverted sensei. Was it some kind of unspoken law that required several famed Konoha shinobi to be either openly or secretly perverts? Sakura soon turned her mind back towards the pages of information she looking for anything that was out of place that would show whether or not Kakashi was hiding something that the man may have been brilliant but he was only qualified for basic first aid at best when it came to things medical, thought was nothing. She would be damned if her team lost yet another member because of a stupid decision on her watch. Sasuke's desire for vengeance she could understand to a certain degree, and maybe the girl she had been may have thought he had every right to follow his own way. But the years since his desertion had showed her how much of a blunder the Uchiha boy had made. Both of the village's loyal Sannin were wary of taking direct action against Uchiha Itachi, and she doubted Orochimaru could have given Sasuke the strength he would need to kill his elder brother. When one considered the information Jiraiya had found about the Snake Sannin's involvement with the Akatsuki themselves, it only added to how terrible a mistake her crush had long since made. According to the author of the damned staple book of perverts everywhere, it seemed that Orochimaru had attempted to murder Sasuke's brother the moment the traitor joined the organization with the Red Clouds, and lost to the then 13-year-old quite handily at that. Sakura was certain that had her wayward teammate been aware of that defeat he would have never joined up with someone who his brother had nearly killed. Damn it, the medic thought sourly as her concentration lapsed and she lost her place in the book. It's been years since he left us, and in that time we haven't heard even the slightest rumors about him or where Orochimaru is keeping him. Still, though Naruto is back home now, and with him in the village, it's only a matter of time before we actually start doing something to help find Sasuke. Sakura opened and then closed her eyes for the second time before resuming the jutsu. Yes. Naruto, Kakashi-sensei, and myself. Team 7 is definitely going to be back together soon, I just know it. So why then? Why is, despite knowing all of this, do I lose my focus whenever I think of Sasuke? Why is it that the pain I feel hasn't disappeared since the day Kakashi-sensei showed up carrying Naruto and only Naruto on his back? Mercifully, the collected and calming words of her sensei reached her ears. Sakura? Blinking several times as her strained trance finally reached its end and she returned to reality, it took the Rosette several moments before she could form a cognitive response, simple as it was, however. Yes, Kakashi-sensei. Turning his head 90 degrees to his right so that his sole visible eye was locked with her pair of aqua-green eyes. The lone eye blinked once before curving into his trademarked eye smile. She and Naruto were certain the Hitaki really would patent the look if ever allowed, that conveyed the nearly unnoticeable trace of awkwardness that filled the inside of the tree, while I'm certain many men would have absolutely no problem with having a young woman's hands on his body. I think your reason for having them on my back is surely done by now, right? I mean any longer and it would be considered inappropriate behavior. After all, you were one of my cute little genin once upon a time. Her reaction to the words was quite obvious and perfectly understandable. Immediately the kunoichi pulled her hands away from the Jonin's back as though they had been grazed by a mid-level Kaiden jutsu. Indeed, Sakura felt significantly hotter as she began to stutter out some kind of retort to her leader's words, her skin taking on a shade nearly the same as her own hair. The shade increased as her eyes soon moved on to stare for a moment at the blue cloth that hid his face from the world and imagined the handsome face she perceived to be beneath it. It was that thought that nearly caused her to say something embarrassing, and also forced her to duck her head down and grip her short pants tightly in her fists. Kami, she thought that she had outgrown that desire to see her teacher's face when she was taken off of his team to become Tsunade's apprentice, damn it. It seemed that the seemingly unobservant Kakashi had taken notice of his one-time student's state of being as he chuckled for a bit at how easily she was embarrassed when one knew just which buttons needed to be pressed. If there was one thing Kakashi missed about being a teacher, it was those moments when he expertly, although according to one special Jonin, near diabolically, found and manipulated his team's unique personalities for his own amusement. It honestly was a pity that he'd so clearly proven to himself his inability to be a real teacher, otherwise he would have taken another genin team just to obtain the same reaction Sakura was having. Soon the chuckling died down and the kunoichi's skin had lightened several shades nearer her own natural skin tone, and he spoke again. So, I believe we are done her, yes. Why yes, Kakashi-sensei. You were right. you're perfectly fine aside from needing plenty of rest due to your rather severe case of chakra exhaustion. The silver-haired Jonin nodded once before slowly rising to his own 2 feet. Taking note of the slight, but still plainly noticeable, wobble to his movements, Sakura quickly rose up to help her sensei. Looking down at the mass of pink, the Hitaki couldn't help but roll his last biological eye. You don't have to do this, Sakura. I can walk on my own. The look the group medic gave him reminded him of an angry Tsunade. Damn, there was no safe way to argue against that look. The Rosette smiled innocently as her sensei capitulated to her whims, and Kakashi knew there was nothing innocent behind it at all. He had been around enough medics to know just what that look meant. It had been the same look Rin had when she first treated Minato-sensei after he received a serious wound before he had managed to perfect either of his most famous jutsu. A look that was meant to hide the thoughts currently running through his former pupil's head. The thought that she had power over a weakened figure of authority, her team leader. With luck, Sakura would turn out more like his own medic of a teammate and be less controlling than certain medical nin who let it start to mess with their minds. Moments later, Kakashi was able to reach his flak jacket and weapons pouches near the entrance of the long-dead tree. The Jonin did require some assistance from Team Kakashi's sole female, however. Kakashi could do nothing to stop the grin from appearing beneath his cloth face mask as he noticed how quickly Sakura could switch from embarrassed to controlling and then back to embarrassment. Deciding that he had embarrassed the kunoichi enough for the moment, Kakashi opened his mouth. Hey Sakura, I don't suppose you could go and check with Guy. See if blonde number 1 and blonde number 2 are back yet. Mentally thanking her sensei for the obvious exit he had given her to stop the awkwardness that helping him had caused, Sakura quickly nodded. Turning to leave the tree, Sakura took off to find the most eccentric ninja she had ever met in her life. Before leaving, however, she looked over her shoulder at her sensei. She soon sweat dropped at the sight. Kakashi had once again taken a seat and pulled out the new copy of his favorite novel series that Naruto had given him. That was what, 50 seconds since I finished with him. Kami, what is so damned interesting about that little book? From what Naruto told me, it's just page of smut after smut with just enough plot to qualify as a novel anyway. Mentally sighing, Sakura faintly smiled at the sensei who had changed the least out of the old Team 7 before turning around to leave at last. Silently counting, Kakashi put his precious reading material down after reaching 10. The Hitaki continued to observe the spot the medic had just recently been standing on. Cocking his head to the right slightly, Kakashi soon developed an eye smile. I give her a 9 out of 10 for the ass. Immediately his eye opened in shock at the thought he had just had, as though it was not his own. Looking down at the little green book in his hand, the Sharingan wielder swore the pages were laughing at him. Sighing, Kakashi decided his perverted thought in regards to the pink-haired woman was the result of him unfortunately spending too much time reading Ika Ika. Seriously, 18 though Sakura may be, he needed to get laid if he was starting to think about one of his students in that way. No matter how attractive a woman she obviously becoming. Perhaps in a year or two. Damn, another stray perverted thought. Shrugging his shoulders a second later, and Kakashi was back to reading his new favorite book. Lord Jiraiya had really outdone himself with the latest Ika Ika. Alone in the hollowed remains of a tree, perverted giggles could be heard coming from Hitaki Kakashi. I can't believe I had to toss away my jacket, you bastard. Uzumaki Naruto shouted indignantly at the older blonde whose arm was wrapped around his neck and he was supporting. After moving to help the apparently ill Namikaze, out of the kindness of his heart the ramen-obsessed teen added, he was rewarded by having the misfortune of taking the place of a bucket for the very green son of a Hokage. He was now clad in the plain black t-shirt that he kept under his favorite jacket. That jacket had been something his more perverted teacher had given him, and now Naruto had lost one of the few gifts he had ever received in his difficult life, and all because he was trying to be helpful. Such betrayal on the part of Arashi demanded compensation, and Naruto would extract his payment in a week-long ramen binge at Ikiruka's courtesy of the elder blonde's wallet. What made it worse was that some of the Namikaze's regurgitated meal had caked the necklace that Ba-chan had given him. Despite how sick enough that he considered just putting it in a storage seal, it may have been Naruto had cleaned it as best he could before placing it around his neck again. A loud and painful groan was the first response and was soon followed by a rather undignified attempt at intimidation. Fishcake. If you value your life, you had best shut up before I kill you. Naruto snorted before sticking his tongue at the other blonde. Considering that you're looking weak enough that a night alone in this forest could kill you, I really ain't all that intimidated by that threat. Arashi lifted his head to glare half-heartedly at his fellow self. Smirking in a way that showed he had a plan to back up his earlier statement, that might indeed be true, Naruto. Unfortunately for you, kid, I can see quite a few problems with you doing that. The Uzumaki raised an eyebrow at the words. Looking up into the sky, he could see that they were losing sunlight, maybe half an hour before the sun set in the forest. To compensate for his sick companion, Naruto had decided it would be best to catch up with the other Konoha nin by walking on the forest floor. No matter how angry he was, and for multiple reasons too, at Arashi it paled in comparison to how bored he could get. With that in mind, he decided to continue the conversation they had just started. And would Mr. Puke all over my shirt please tell me what he thinks I may have missed? Really? That's the best you could come up with? What? Oh hell no. I just don't want the guy who made me lose my favorite jacket trying to steal the creativity going through this head of mine. You give yourself way too much credit, Fishcake. In my experience, there are only a few people alive at any given time who should ever be allowed to run their mouths. And you know what? They all happen to have a knack for spotting the perfect moment to drop some subtle or over-the-top statements that show that they are either insane or insanely brilliant. What's being insane have to do with me having anything cool to say? You admitting you're insane then, Fishcake? Wow, it took me weeks to say that myself. Oi, I am not in wait. You're insane. Of course, kid. Insanity is just another word for people everyone thinks are lacking a few things upstairs, but are usually the ones who become famous worldwide. Or was that infamous? Anyway, I happen to have gone insane a few times, I think. Enough times that I'm not totally aware if I happen to be normal right now, or if I have reached that point of insanity where I believe that I am sane. And it's people like that that everyone has to watch out for. Naruto looked up slightly at the man who was steadily regaining the color he had lost while ruining the younger blonde's orange-striped jacket. Until he returned to Konoha, and until he got some answers regarding the furball, Naruto refused to let the matter go. He worried that if he didn't, then he might ask the Namikaze the questions he wanted to know, and that the answers might lead to a fight between them. If it came to that, Naruto wanted the fight to be after Ero Sennin had given a few more people the seals that had stopped the Kyuubi's chakra from taking over his mind and body. With that in mind, Naruto smirked before opening his mouth and speaking a way to hide the still present anger he felt. Ha! If you really are insane, then I shouldn't trust what you're saying to me. This means that there really isn't anything stopping me from leaving you in the forest alone while I get to catch up with my friends and sleep by the warm campfire they'll probably have set up when I get there. It was Arashi's turn to offer a snort in response to a blonde ninja's words. Shaking his head in amusement, the son of the Yondaime Hokage began to speak in a chiding tone. Maybe, but you can't leave me behind if I'm the one with that right, Fishcake. And that, Naruto, is the first problem I see with you leaving me alone. Mind saying that? What the hell? Naruto finished shouting as he separated from Arashi and barely managed to avoid receiving a kunai in his kidneys. As it was, he did not avoid the light cut from the sharpened blade as Arashi managed a second slash. Not willing to chance any closer strikes, the youngest of the pair quickly brought his hands up to make the hand seal needed for a second use of Kage Bunshin. The two clones he made were quickly taken down after Arashi delivered an upward slash at one with his tri-pronged kunai while elbowing the neck of the other. The split-second action allowed Naruto to create some distance between him and his assailant. Flipping the kunai in his hand so that the blade was perpendicular to the ground he was standing on, Arashi smoothly moved into a basic guard stance. Without any additional movement, he created two of his Kage Bunshin on either side of him. The blonde man and his four clones each had the same amused and taunting grin on their faces. Together they began to speak. The next time you decide to carry an unknown shinobi, never assume that what you are seeing of them is real. Deception is the unchanging universal aspect shared by all ninja no matter their home. That was part one of the first problem I noticed. You mistakenly assumed that just because I am the son of Hokage that I would not pose any threat to Konoha soldier. You clearly forgot that I am still at the moment a nuke nin. Growling in the back of his throat, Naruto formed 3 times as many of his own bunshin. The two sides continued to stare unflinchingly at the other as the sun continued to set behind Arashi. A grim smile came over Naruto's face as he narrowed cobalt blue eyes and drew his own kunai, an action quickly followed by his own force of clones. The smile soon turned into a feral smirk reminiscent of a fox's, you know what. This is the perfect excuse that I can use to really make you miserable. Across from him Arashi had an equally foxy grin plastered to his face. Behind that grin, however, he was methodically taking in as many details as he could discern from Naruto. This world's version of himself was clearly unaware of his heritage, considering how surprised he had been upon hearing that the name of the Yondaime Hokage was Namikaze Minato. That was confirmed when Kakashi and Guy had exchanged looks when he had mentioned the boy's heritage. In his travels after becoming a missing ninja, Arashi had taken time to learn more about the world, including as much as he could about Jinchuriki of other nations. He had discovered that it was disgustingly common for the containers of the tailed beasts to often become little more than mindless weapons for their respective homes, few actually having any real sense of free will. Naruto was obviously the container for Kyuubi. Any doubts Arashi privately held had been crushed when he felt the fox's chakra leaking from the genin. It was also equally obvious that he was not some kind of mindless weapon of mass destruction. Combined with his lack of knowledge regarding his parentage pointed to him being ignored by the shinobi forces of the Leaf, and quite possibly the civilian population of the village as well. Naruto knew Kage Bunshin, he knew the Rasengan, and he was on the way to becoming a master of the sealing arts. By his age Arashi had been in Anbu Black Ops, and Naruto was still a genin who he doubted had more than 3 years of experience at most. With all the potential the younger him had, it was maddening that he was at such a low station. Arashi needed to see for himself what the village had done to Naruto by not paying much attention to him. He hoped that it was just ignoring him anyway. Can he help any who had harmed the boy in his younger years? The Namikaze also wanted to see how much control he had over the Biju inside of him as well. And if Uzumaki Naruto was anything like him, then the best way to find anything out was through a fight. That in mind, Arashi allowed the grin to shrink in size before opening his mouth to speak one last time before they began fighting. Well, Naruto, I'm sure Kakashi Ni-san probably says this to you and your lovely teammate, he continued on through the indignant shout, but I think I'll say it anyway. Come at me with the intent to kill. Duck the roundhouse kick, roll left and avoid Rasengan to the back. Drop to the ground and allow the shuriken to fly overhead and strike 2 Kage Bunshin. Push off the ground, then raise left kunai up to catch the downward slash at the purposely exposed back. Use right kunai to parry a second clone's assault to the right, then disengage with the Bunshin behind. Allow the clone to lose balance and step forward and into its brother. Jump away from the 2 recovering Bunshin and throw an explosive tag between them. Turn 180 degrees and throw the left and right kunai into a pair of clones charging up an Odama Rasengan. Run through the smoke left behind by the 2's dispelling and form a pair of futon Kage Bunshin. Grab the clone nearest and hurl it up and towards the forest canopy. The second futon clone steps out of the smoke and into an ambush of 5 Kage Bunshin. Perform substitution with the Kage Bunshin underground. Wait 3 seconds, hear the massive burst of air pressure, then burst out of the ground and latch onto the original. Open palm jab towards left elbow, curse silently as it bursts into smoke, draw handful of shuriken, then throw at the incoming hostile shuriken. Don't wait for the long-range weapons to connect, instead draw a single kunai with the right hand, then leap into the trees. Catch the flicker of movement in the periphery of the left eye, shift stance and brace for the collision. The ring of shuriken striking shuriken echo as the thrown clone connects head first with left side. Grit teeth as the sound of cracking ribs is heard and spin on the right foot to parry 3 thrown kunai in rapid succession. See electric blue move behind a thick tree for cover, then raise kunai to mouth.